Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto is Kaguya's husband harem. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by the Slumbering Dragon and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. The end is the beginning. The legend. That's what he was to the people across the whole world. They revered him as something that escalated beyond the realms of humanity. It was through him that the word kami originated. They revered him as a god. A being that transcended beyond the limits and wildest imaginations of humanity, all the while being worshipped as being an entity who can be defined as an ascended form of mortal that has reached a realm of power which is said to be beyond the wildest comprehensions of humankind. This was the legend of Naruto Utsutsuki. Naruto, who was currently in his deathbed, stared tiredly at the ceiling as his entire life flashed right in front of his eyes. Maybe this is what people meant when they say that you start to remember your entire life while being near death. His mind immediately drifted towards his two sisters and his mother. The ones who loved him more than anyone else in this entire world. Naruto smiled sardonically as his eyes drooped over in mild exhaustion. His thoughts on his sisters and mother were something that was sacred to all four of them, but for the rest of the world, it may as well be considered sinful. But then again, who cared about the rest of the world? The thought of his sisters and mother being his lovers too. The first of his two sisters was none other than the widely hailed Rikidunizu, priestess of 6 paths. A woman who could achieve feats that is beyond a human's imagination. She was, by many, revered as a goddess in her own rights, with many even forming cults in her name. A flattering deed, if you ask her. But then again, someone who had been able to defeat and seal the Juubi along with her sister, should indeed be revered. Foremost of all, her name was something that only he, along with his sister and mother were aware of. A name that always sang a beautiful song in his heart. Her name was Himuri Utsutsuki. Another important thing about her was that she was the mother of both Ashura and Indra, the respective originators of Senju and Uchiha clan. Of course, he was their father. And, a proud one he was, no matter how much conflicts both of his sons had with each other. He could still remember the refreshing memory of holding both his sons while they were a newborn, as Himuri panted in fatigue after going through the process of labor. Naruto felt a smile appearing on his lips as he reminisced one of his fondest memories. And then, there was his second sister, Himari Utsutsuki. She was also infamous for assisting her sister Himuri in defeating the Juubi. And, she was also widely known for being the mother of the Hyuga clan that was now quite famous across the world. Of course, once again, he was the father to the children Himari gave birth to. And, last but not the least, was his mother, who was the only one who could actually rival him in terms of power. She was the widely proclaimed rabbit goddess and also the progenitor of all the chakra that exists among various humans. A princess at one time and a goddess the next moment, she was Kaguya Utsutsuki. And, once again, admitting it without a shred of shame, she was also his lover. Yes, he committed the incestuous act of making love with both his sisters and fathering their children. Yes, he had incestuous relationship with his own mother. But, it was something that they never regretted because their love transcended all the boundaries these petty humans had drawn. Their souls were interlinked with each other with a bond of love, which was so strong that it might as well be beyond the comprehensions of a simple man. One of the main reasons he could accept his mother without an ounce of guilt would be because he and his sisters were born without a father. Kaguya, twisting the very fabrics of reality, had created him and his sisters in her womb without the need of a man's sperm, in turn going against the very law of nature. In short, Kaguya was their sole parent responsible for their birth. They really were freaks. Even by the nature of their birth. He didn't remember since when it was that his mother started to lust and love him romantically. But, he could clearly remember that since his very infancy, she had always favored him and loved him more over his sisters. So much that when his own sisters had tried to gain his affection, his mother had fought and rebelled with them to keep his attention to her. Ah, catfights fond memories. Over time, all four of them had developed a bond so strong that it went beyond anything that could be defined logically in human terms. While his mother and sisters did have small spats with each other over his affection, they just shrugged it off afterwards, as their love for him transcended anything else in the world. The only regret that he had, as he laid in his deathbed, was that he was unable to give his mother any children. It's not that he was incapable. After all, he was considered the pinnacle of masculinity by all his 3 lovers. No, it was because he had never anticipated himself to be near the death's door so prematurely. Naruto's vision started to blur as he started to violently cough, signifying his deteriorating health. Naruto. Hearing 3 voices call out his name in panic, he wearily turned his head to his side to see all 3 his lovers hanging over his head with worried and fearful expression etched on their tear-laced faces. The 3 women that came into his sight could be accounted as one of the most delicate and beautiful-looking females. All three women were so like to each other that three of them could have been identical sister, were it not for the fact that he knew one of them was their mother, while the other two were his sisters. Both his sisters looked identical to each other, with the only exception being their eyes. While one possessed a Rinnegan, the other possessed the Byakugan. They possessed long flowing silvery hair, with only minute bits of spikiness in them. They both had their eyebrows cut short, symbolized an ability they inherited from their mother. In addition, they had two protrusions like horns sticking out from their head, something that he along with his sisters inherited from their mother. His mother, on a similar scale, was a woman in possession of very delicate facial features, something that both his sisters shared with her. Kaguya also had an extremely long, sweeping light-colored hair that touched the ground. Most noticeable were two horn-like protrusions which stuck out from her head. Her eyebrows were cut very short, a symbol of nobility. And, she wore a dark shade of lipstick on her lips and a dark shade of nail polish on her long fingernails. The most similar feature that all the three women shared was that they wore the transitional high-collared harem kimono, which was adorned with intricate lines and tomo running down the center and edges of the gown. Naruto, seeing the distress on their beautiful faces, tried to smile comfortingly at them, but that certainly failed when he once started to cough, as his lungs started to fail in its function. Naruto Himuri's concerned voice trailed off as she stared at her beloved brother and husband with a disquieted face. She was clearly frightened by the prospect of her love dying. Please hang on. We will try to create a new technique for you to survive this. Onto her side, Himari nodded in agreement as she stared at Naruto with a panicked expression on her tear-laced face. Yes, Naru-kun. Please try to stay with us. She tried to encourage her husband. But it sounded as if she was trying to comfort herself from the thought Naruto dying. Suddenly, Naruto's arm was grabbed by a delicate pair of hands as Kaguya's tearful visage came into view. Sachiko, please stay with me. She sobbed out at him as her grip on his arm tightened. I can't live in a world where you don't exist. Naruto's eyes softened as he saw his two sisters and his mother suffering from his pitiful state. He tried to smile encouragingly at them. Girls, please. Don't cry anymore. I also want to live, but it still doesn't change the situation. He felt a small tear slide down his face as he smiled at them. His words only ignited more sobs from his lovers as they showed grief at his condition. Naruto sighed resignedly as turned back towards the ceiling. It's a bit unfortunate. I wanted to see how my life would have turned out. How my sons would live their life, he smiled a bit sadly at the end. But because of an unknown disease, I'm now on the verge of dying prematurely. Don't say that. Himuri screamed as she suddenly clasped his hand in desperation. Please, Narukoi. I promise you. We will create a technique for you to continue to live. Please, just hang in there for us. Saying this, she had been ready to go her room to research on her said technique, but was stopped by her husband's hand, which had clasped on her arm. Turning back towards him, she saw him shaking his head sorrowfully at her. Without uttering anything, he pulled her down towards him and kissed her. Momentarily stunned, Himuri regained her bearing as she proceeded to kiss her lover passionately. After a few seconds, their kiss ended as Himuri separated herself from Naruto with a visible trail of tear on her cheeks. Naruto smiled weakly at her before he tiredly turned towards his other sister. Himari, he weakly called out to her. Himari closed up on his face with her own tearful face. Without saying any more words, she lowered her face on Naruto's and kissed him with all the love and passion she possessed for the said man. After a few moments of sharing tender love with Himari, Naruto felt his vision starting to blacken. He knew that this was the signal of his time in the mortal realm nearing its end. Haheim. He called out to her in a strained voice as he was determined to part this world after sharing moments with all his lovers. Kaguya, who by now hovered over her son and lover's face, seemed to be in denial at what was happening in front of her. Sachiko, she whispered to him in a low voice, refusing to believe that her beloved's death was impending. Please don't leave me. Naruto smiled a bit sadly as he heard the sorrow and denial in Kaguya's voice. He really regretted not impregnating her all this time, as he knew that after his death, Kaguya's mental stability could derail. After all, she was not considered to be one among the sane people. I would never leave you. Kaheim. He spoke in a hoarse voice as he breathed sharply to stay in the land of living. His vision started to blacken completely as he could only see some minute dotted things in front of him. With all the strength that he could muster, he pulled Kaguya's face towards his own. With a smile on his face, while his lips were inches away from Kaguya's, he continued. Because I would always be with you in your heart. Saying that, his lips met with Kaguya's as the said woman relished in the feeling of the soft flesh that was in contact with her own. The passionate feeling that she savored right now had not dulled a bit even in the face of the death. With all the love that she had for the one she was sharing a moment with, she pressed her lips more tightly to that of the man she loved, hoping to soothe the fear and despair that was currently gripping her heart at the prospect of his death. But she soon stopped dead in her track when she sensed that Naruto was no longer returning her kiss. With equal amounts of dread and trepidation seeping into her mind, she slowly retracted herself from her beloved son. And that was when fears came true as she saw that he had breathed his last during his kiss with her. Naruto. Both his sisters cried out in anguish and heartbreak as they saw that the man they loved had passed away. Drowned in their sorrow and misery, they started to vocally display their distress as they cried over Naruto's dead body. Kaguya, who after witnessing Naruto's death, had stumbled a few feet away from the group as she stared at the scene in front of her, with denial clearly written on her face. No, she thought, as she tried to deny the truth of the harsh reality. She started to deny the very existence of this reality as she stared at the scene of her beloved's death. A world without Sachikoi could not exist. In that moment, her thoughts took a dark turn. A dark path that would lead to the collapse of the once happy family it used to be when Naruto had been alive. Kaguya's third eye, which possessed the Rinnegan, opened up as it glowed with an untold amount of power. I won't let this world exist without my koi. I will create a world where my Naruto would exist. Whether it was for good or bad, this event would penultimately lead to a future far across time, which would decide the fate of the world. The whole world, to Naruto, felt as if it blurred past him as he felt an inescapable massive tug on his soul. It was as if the time stream itself was fast-forwarding in a ridiculous pace as it showed desperation for his rebirth. So I was right. He thought idly as the world still blurred past him. There would come a time when the world would once again need my presence. A time where I would take a rebirth. While he would have been happy to provide any help he could to the world in its attempt to restore its peace back, he felt a bit sad too. It was because he knew that he would lose all the memories of his past life. A life where he shared his love with his two sisters and his mother. While it would be true that his powers and memories would still exist with his soul, it would remain so dormant and deeply buried within the deepest depths of his soul that he might as well consider it an impossibility to ever recollect it during his new life. Just when his thought process ended, he felt the blur slowing down before stopping to the scene of a cave where a red-haired woman in the process of giving birth to a child. Naruto felt a smile tugging his lips as he saw the woman struggling to give birth to her child. So she is my mother in this life. He then turned towards the blonde-haired man who was encouraging the red-haired woman to keep going on. And he must be my father. Naruto felt a foreign emotion seeping into his mind as he saw the one who would be his father in this new life. In his previous life, he had never known how it felt to receive the love of his father. The notion of having a father was an alien concept to him. But at least in this life, he would know how it would feel to have a father when such a figure didn't even exist in his previous life. He then turned back towards the woman who was going to be his mother. Kaguya, bless her soul, may have been the most loving woman to him, but she had never been up to the mark when it came to giving her children a motherly affection. For the longest time he knew, she always doted on him in a way that breached the border of possessiveness. And, when he grew up, her affection became that of lustful and romantic love. But, he didn't feel the same way about this woman. Maybe, for the first time, he would know what a real mother's love would be like. It was just too bad that he wouldn't have his memory to relish it. He just hoped that by some miracle he would gain it back. As he thought on all this, he felt himself descending down towards the womb of the red-haired woman. With that, he also felt his consciousness and memories of his previous life slipping away. It was with a last smile that Naruto entered the womb of his mother in his new life. It's the start of my new life. On a lush green landscape where a flowing river added to the beauty of the scenery, two people were busy making their way through it as they sped towards their destination, which happened to be none other than Konohagakure no Sado. Hirosenin. At the shout of the first person, the second person collapsed to the ground in a face fault. Damn it, brat. How many times do I have to tell you to stop calling me that? The first person snorted back at the downed person as he smirked at him. I will call you that until you stop peeping on women. No way. In response to this, the first person sighed resignedly at his mentor's antics. The mentor was a tall man with waist-length spiky white hair usually tied back into a ponytail, with two shoulder-length bangs that framed both sides of his face. He also had red lines that ran down from his eyes and wore a horned forehead protector with the kanji for oil. He also had a noticeable wart on the left side of his nose. The person wore a green short shirt kimono and matching pants, under which he wore mesh armor that showed out of the sleeves and legs of his outfit. His outfit was completed with hand guards, a simple black belt, traditional Japanese wooden sandals, a red haori with two simple yellow circles on each side, and a scroll on his back. He was none other than Toad Sage, Jiraiya of the Sannin. The person, who had been teasing his mentor until now, was a very handsome guy, with an air of nobility and regal aura, which was in complete contradiction with the personality that he possessed. His spiky blonde hair, which also had a silky characteristic to it, in contradiction to the spikiness it had, added an exotic feature to his exquisite look, with two jaw-length bangs covering the sides of his handsome visage. His attire consisted of an outfit consisting of a blue full bodysuit that covered his whole arm. This bodysuit was underneath a black half-sleeve jacket, leading to showcase his arms that were covered in black bodysuit cloth. To be seen from the end of the was adorning the traditional grey anbu pants, along with a half-sleeve high-collar black jacket that was zipped open from the front. Though, he did have occasional orange flame wisps spread all over his jacket. He was the apprentice of Toad Sage and the son of the Yondaime Hokage, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto knew his full lineage. He knew Jiraiya was his godfather. Most importantly, he knew who his father was. He knew that he was the son of the Yondaime Hokage, Minato Namikaze. Learning this truth from Jiraiya at the end of their training trip was something that made him have hard time reining his control over his temper and patience. At first, he had been angry at his father for making him the Jinchuriki. So much that he had started to scream bloody murders on the nearest poor soul, who just so happened to be Jiraiya. But then, after the steam escaped his system, he had a clear mind to think on the reason why his father did what he did. He had not been happy at his own father sealing the Kyuubi inside him. But, when he had heard the reason for it from Jiraiya, he just couldn't hold on to his anger anymore. When he learned that his father had faith in him being the only one who could control Kyuubi power, along with giving him an edge in the shinobi world, his anger had totally vanished away. Add onto it, the many memories of his parents during Kushina's pregnancy that Jiraiya narrated to him, the prominent one being his father deriving his name and the meaning behind his derivation, his heart had totally melted at the end. Sighing once again at the antics of his godfather, Naruto's face took a serious turn as he looked at the older man. "Iro-sennin, how much time would it take for us to go back? Konoha needs us right now," he told Jiraiya in a serious tone, while slight concern for his home village dripping into his voice. Jiraiya's face also gained a serious expression as he heard Naruto's concern. He can't blame the blonde for his concerns, as he was also worried about his village. "In few hours, Naruto," he replied back in an assuring manner. But that said, both of them once again set on their path back towards their village, with each of them having concerned thoughts over their home. Their return to the village was not supposed to happen right now, as both the student-teacher duo had planned on few months vacation time before returning back to Konoha. But, in a twist of fate, something big happened right on the outskirts of the Konoha territory border. Orochimaru, with his accomplice Kabuto, were spotted in that area. And it's from there that everything tumbled down to chaos. Accompanying them was the army of Kusagakure. Abusing everything out of Edo Tensei technique, Orochimaru had revived every recent known famous dead shinobis from all over the world. Of course, this time he excused himself from reviving the dead Hokages. Whether it was out of his fear that he couldn't control them or if he was incapable of doing so was unknown, but he at least gave Konoha this much favor of not reviving them. Even then, many renowned shinobi had been resurrected if the intel they got was right. Sandaime Reikage, Nidaime Tsuchikage, Nidaime Mizukage, the list was endless. Things turned out for even worse when Iwa decided to join the frame and thought that this was a golden opportunity to destroy their longtime nemesis village, along with the help of Orochimaru. The result of the clash was as expected. After an agonizing day of continuous warfare, Konoha was quickly losing its ground and was on the verge of losing to an army of dead shinobi. But, out of nowhere, the rescue came in the form of a troop of army from Tsunagakure, with Kazukiage himself leading the army. With the additional help, Konoha had been steadily gaining its bearing back, with many seal experts sealing away the souls of Edo Tensei shinobis. But, the war quickly took a nasty turn when Orochimaru summoned the one person who was considered to be the Bujiman of all the shinobi. He summoned Madara Uchiha. That was the last of the information both Naruto and Jiraiya got from the Sennin spy network, and it only added to their worries even more. Ever since then, they had been in constant running, trying to make their way back to their village as fast as possible. And they had to get back to Konoha as quickly as they could before it is turned to ruin by an undead army and the resurrected Uchiha Supremo. As Naruto and Jiraiya reached the outskirts of the Konoha village, they both sighed in relief when they saw that the village, somehow, was still standing. It seemed that the army never let any opposing shinobi enter the premise of the village. After which, when they turned their sight towards the battlefield, they got the biggest shock of their life. Hovering in the air, above both the armies, was a beautiful woman who had long, sweeping light-colored hair with two protrusion-like horns over her head. The most striking and the most disbelieving feature of her was that she possessed Byakugan in both her eyes, while she possessed Rinnegan as a third eye on her forehead. Hovering at equal height a few distance away from this woman were two other women who looked almost identical to each. In fact, they shared similarity to the first woman in terms of looks and beauty. The only difference these two women had with each other were that where one possessed Byakugan in her eyes, the other possessed the Rinnegan. Off to a corner, even a resurrected Madara Uchiha looked scared at the sight of these three women. The same could be said about Inoki, the Tsuchikage, and Orochimaru and his accomplice Kabuto. What the hell is happening? Naruto asked with confusion evident in his voice as he was unable to comprehend the situation. I don't know. Jiraiya replied back while looking equally confused at the turn of events. They both looked at each other and nodded as they decided that they needed information from a first-hand eyewitness. Deciding on this, dashed towards the place where Konoha army stood and jumped directly in front of the 5th Hokage, Tsunade Senju. What the? Tsunade cursed out loud when she sensed two shinobi jumping in from her, tensing herself momentarily for a blind attack before she got a good look at the ones who stood in front of her. Jiraiya. Naruto. You both came back. She, along with many who knew Naruto, were pleasantly surprised at the sudden appearance of both the shinobi. Tsunade, Jiraiya said, not waiting for any pleasantries as he looked at her seriously. What is happening here? He inquired imploringly. Tsunade sighed tiredly as she debated whether both these shinobi would believe what she was going to relay, but still decided to go with it. I don't know if you guys are going to believe this, but the two women hovering over there are the priestess of 6 paths and the Hyuga ancestor, both of whom are sisters. While hovering opposite to them is their mother, who is the progenitor of all the chakra. When Tsunade finished relating the information about the three mysterious women's identity, she was met with the expected sight of both Naruto and Jiraiya gaping at her in disbelief. Tsunade, Jiraiya, who had lost his composure at hearing the baffling information, made an awkward expression while laughing nervously. Isn't that a bit too much? Tsunade once again sighed. Believe me, Jiraiya. If I hadn't witnessed this with own 2 eyes, then I also wouldn't have believed this. Their attention was quickly diverted when heard the start of the conversation between the 3 hovering women. Ha-chan. Please stop this. Himuri, who was none other than the legendary Rikido Nizu, shouted at her mother with a slight desperate face. He wouldn't have wanted this to happen. Amari nodded silently in agreement as she too looked pleadingly at her mother. Kaguya's glare intensified when she heard her daughter talking. Don't you dare bring him into this. She snarled at them as the true Rinnegan on her forehead glowed brightly with power. I'm doing all this for him. A world without him is a world that should not exist. Besides, Kaguya trailed off as she looked down in a rare moment of vulnerability. I can sense his presence in this world. I can sense the existence of his chakra. I know he is here. Amuri shook her sadly as she heard the words her mother spoke out. While it was true that even she could sense her husband's chakra and his presence in this world, she only accounted it as a remnant of Naruto's chakra that he left in this world at his death. Kaguya's expression darkened as she started to emit an unholy amount of power that frightened every shinobi in the premise. I don't care what it takes to create a world where he would be there. I want my Naruto. She screamed out to the whole world. The area remained silent for a few 10 seconds before every head turned towards the blonde-haired shinobi while yelling at him. Naruto. Naruto, seeing that every head was turned towards him, had a horrified expression on his face. Wait. What did I do? Sadly, his questions remained unanswered. At hearing the name of their once deceased lover, all 3 women turned towards the blonde-haired figure. The moment their eyes landed on Naruto, they felt their eyes widening in shock and hope. Amuri Himari whispered with unshed tears brimming up in her eyes as her eyes brightened up in sheer happiness. It's him. It's him. That aura, that chakra, it's really him. Amuri couldn't find her voice at the prospect of her once dead lover, in a reborn form, being in front of her. Unable to contain her joy, she started to shed her tears in happiness and pure exultation. Kaguya, who had been staring, with hitched breath, at Naruto while involuntarily crying in silent joy, suddenly initiated the motion as she quickly disappeared into a tear across the space in front of her. The next moment, she appeared out of another tear in space in front of Naruto, freaking the hell out of said person, as well all the other people who had been in the premise. Ignoring the petrified expression on Naruto's face, which mirrored on all the other shinobis near him, Kaguya closed up on the blonde with a distance of just an inch from his face. While staring lovingly and possessively at him, she gently cradled both his cheeks in her hands while caressing them affectionately. Naruto, now visibly terrified at the closeness with a goddess who could vaporize his entire existence away at the blink of an eye, started to stutter out. Beba-chan. Iiro-sen, help. He mumbled weakly while unable to tear his eyes away from Kaguya's face. Sadly for Naruto, both Tsunade and Jiraiya seemed to be frozen in shock and fright at the very presence of Kaguya. And, this state was something that mirrored across the entire Konoha and Suna shinobi populace. What they didn't know was that Kaguya was actually responsible for their current state, as she had voluntarily overpowered her presence to such a level that it froze the movements of all the shinobi in the vicinity. Naruto, whose face was being lovingly caressed by the woman in front of him, was unable to tear his eyes away from the beautiful face of Kaguya. Even though he was terrified by her presence, he also felt at peace in her presence at the same time. He didn't know why, but looking into eyes of Kaguya, which were filled with love, he felt as if he had known her for a long time. Kaguya had frown appearing on her beautiful face as she saw that Naruto hadn't recognized her. Your memories are buried deep inside your soul. She spoke up while once again tenderly caressing her reborn son's cheeks. Let me bring them back to you. Saying this, she did the one thing that had every shinobi in the near vicinity almost popping their eyes out in shock and disbelief as they saw her locking her lips with Naruto and sharing a passionate kiss with him. Naruto, while being kissed by Kaguya, felt many images blur right in front of his eyes, making him widen his eyes in shock. My memories. Nearby, one Hinata Hyuga instantly fainted at the sight of her love interest getting mouth raped. Sakura, along with many of her peers, was staring at the scene in front of her with wide disbelieving eyes. Is this really happening? She questioned herself while feeling her brain short-circuiting. Naruto getting kissed by the chakra progenitor. Such was the ridiculousness of the situation that half the shinobi populace there wondered if they were having a strange dream. Soon, the kiss ended between the two as Kaguya reluctantly parted her lips from the blonde. Naruto slowly opened his eyes back to the world, but this time his eyes possessed a previously unseen wisdom and power that was simply immeasurable. Ahime, Naruto whispered in low voice as he stared at the woman who had been his mother in his previous life and was his lover even now. In response to his nickname for her, she smiled in joy with her tear-laced face, nodding back at him in happiness. Soon, both Himuri and Himari appeared on both of Naruto's sides as they greeted him with their own tear-laced face, which they shed out of their joy. Naruto, Himuri didn't wait for any as she slammed her lips upon Naruto's and kissed him with all the love and desire that she had bottled up after his death. Kissing him until her need for breath came up, Himuri parted her lips from the blonde. But Naruto was not given any respite as when his lips got released from that of Himuri, it was immediately engulfed by that of Himari's. The army of shinobis, both the alive and the resurrected ones, stared at the scene in front of them wide gaping jaws as they didn't know what to make of the sight that their eyes were witnessing at the moment. I don't know whether to envy him or pity him. One shinobi blankly stated. Is this some kind of reverse form of gang rape? Another questioned as he stared at sight of Naruto being kissed and molested by the three goddesses. Hirei Tsune trailed off with a dumbfounded expression on her face as her brain tried to compute the event that was transpiring in front of her. Am I really seeing this? She asked her former teammate. When she didn't get any response, she turned towards the Toad Sage, only to feel a deadpan expression settle on her features. The reason for this was because Jiraiya was crying, all the while being proud and jealous at the same time of his godson. Why he cried a bit animatedly as he stared at the scene of Naruto being raped by three women. Why couldn't something like that happen to me? A female villain raping the hell out of the hero. As he trailed off on that sentence, he had a blank expression on his face for a few moments before his eyes suddenly lightened up as if he had been suddenly struck with a bright idea. With a big grin, he took out his notebook and prepared to scribble his bright and golden idea. A female villain raping the hell out of the hero, haha. He suddenly froze midway during his scribble when he heard the sound of fingers cracking. In a slow and frightened movement, he turned towards his teammate only to get terrified even more. Don't. She told him in a dangerous tone with a dark terrifying face accompanied with a smile. As quickly as possible, Jiraiya's notebook vanished away as he blankly stared at the scene of Naruto still getting snogged by the three goddesses. I never said anything. Separating himself from the repeated mouth-raping session Naruto had with the three women, which prompted a chorus of disappointed moans from them, he stepped away from them while smiling fondly at all three of them. It's great to see you again Kahime, Himuri, Himari. His words were met with three sobs of joy as they all engulfed him in a tight embrace while exuding joy at the prospect of gaining the love of their life back. Sighing in happiness into the embrace, he eyed all the shinobis that stood against his village that was his home in this life. He then walked away from his three lovers while standing in front of the opposing army. As he stood in front of the army, his eyes narrowed a bit dangerously. You all dare try to destroy my home. He spoke out to all the shinobi, even the resurrected ones included, in a dangerous tone, with an undercurrent of threat of their annihilation in his voice. I find it unforgivable. Orochimaru, who had been standing idle up until now while watching event that unfolded right now, snorted as he smirked in a slightly condescending manner. Heh. So the Uzumaki brat thinks that just because he got kissed by three chakra goddesses, he now stands a chance against us all by himself. The Budo smirked at his master's statement as he pushed his glass upwards. He has definitely not matured, even after all these years. Madara, who heard the preposterous conversation between those two, remained silent. He knew what was happening here. He knew who Naruto really was if all the three women were so lovingly showering their affection on him. If what he had read from the tablet was right, then all the fools here definitely didn't stand a chance against the blonde, much less those three goddesses. Even he, Madara Uchiha, knew when it was hopeless to stand against an invincible opponent. Silently, he disappeared away from the battlefield. Though it wounded his pride as a warrior badly, even he knew the meaning of the term tactical retreat. Naruto smirked a bit when he heard the mocking words from Orochimaru and Kabuto, while the three women behind him fumed at their beloved being insulted. It's useless to warn people like you. Naruto sighed in mock resignation as he closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them back, all the shinobi present there, even the Konoha ones, were shocked to their very core. When Naruto opened his eyes back, he revealed his brightly glowing Rinnegan eyes to the entire world. RR Rinnegan. Tsunade shouted out in utter shock as she saw the eyes that she believed to be wielded only by the priestess of six paths and her mother Kaguya. Jiraiya. She turned towards her fellow Sannin, you knew about this? Don't look at me. Jiraiya replied back in exclamation. I'm just as shocked as you. Naruto didn't pay heed to the chaos that he had brought around him as he glared at the opposing army with his brightly glowing Rinnegan eyes. You will now face the consequence of attacking of my home. Naruto Shippuden asked my name. Orochimaru, who had been initially surprised by Naruto possessing the Rinnegan, quickly came back to his wits as he made a hand sign, which made all the resurrected shinobi move forward and throwing attacks at Naruto. Inoki too regained his bearing quickly as he ordered all his shinobi to throw attack in the direction of Konoha army, which stood behind Naruto and his three lovers. The wide range of fire, water, earth, wind and lightning techniques came from the combined attack of thousands of shinobi, which resulted in thousands of jutsus raining down on Naruto. As a frightening amount of jutsus came close to descend upon him, Naruto just faced all of it with a smirk on his face. Futile. Naruto muttered, seeing the incoming shower of attacks as both his Rinnegan eyes glowed brightly. What happened next shocked both the army sides, even the resurrected ones, as they watched all the jutsu stop midway in their path and hovered in the air in a statue mode as if the time itself had been frozen in the premise. After this, much to the disbelief of all the shinobi there, all the attacks started to retrace its path back towards the shinobi who initiated those jutsu. All the shinobi, resurrected ones included, had their bodies retracing the movements they had instigated moments ago in reverse motion, much to their confusion and bafflement. Before anyone knew it, all the jutsu vanished back into bodies of the shinobi and ground from where the jutsu had first originated. Did he the resurrected Nidame Mizukage started, did he just reverse the time in this area? He asked the question out loud. When his question was met with a large silence, he just mirthfully shook his head with a chuckle. Interesting. Naruto didn't look like he was finished as he brought his palm forward in the direction of the opposing army. The effect of whatever Naruto desired was instantaneous as the entire shinobi army fell to the ground as if their bodies had started to fail in their muscular function. What the hell, Inoki said while gritting his teeth as he tried to stand up against an invisible force that strongly tied his body to the ground. He is controlling the gravity of this area. Orochimaru said in a somewhat odd tone as he struggled to get up from the ground he was glued to, but to no avail. He is controlling the gravity of the earth. At this point, Orochimaru was regretting the mocking words that he had spoken against the blonde who had suddenly become a god out of the blue. Just when all the shinobi thought that they had endured everything, their bodies started to glow with blue outline before they all started to hover high up in the air. He can restrict and control our movements. Kabuto now sounded nervous of the powers that Naruto had in his arsenal. In a moment's notice, all the shinobi were levitated high into the atmosphere before they witnessed a frightening scene of the earth splitting into two halves. And continued to tear apart until the moment came where all of them could practically see the core of the earth, which was a globe of fire. Steadily, but in a frightening manner, the fire from the core started to rise up to the surface of the earth as it threatened to come out Earth's womb to engulf the entire shinobi army. Retreat. Naruto warned all of them as he glared at them with brightly glowing Rinnegan eyes. Don't force me to reduce the shinobi population of this world by several thousands. Inoki gritted his teeth when he heard the threat in Naruto's words. It was a humiliation for the Iwa shinobi army to be forced to flee away because of the fear of just one man's power. It was a feeling that he had forgot ever since Madara Uchiha died. Swallowing all his pride, he shouted out, our retreat. As soon as Inoki said the word, the earth mended back into one shape, with fire retreating back into the core. The earth, which had been split apart, joined back as if it had never been torn apart in the first place. All the shinobi, who had been levitating in the air, were brought down back to the earth. As soon as their feet touched the ground, all the Kusa and Iwa shinobi started flee the battlefield, along with their leaders Orochimaru and Inoki. This was a day of utter humiliation and embarrassment for both the shinobis. Watching this, Naruto turned back towards his three lovers with a massive grin on his face. I still got the fire, girls. The response he got from the three was something that made him almost face fault. Himuri was covering her face with her palm while shaking her head in resignation. Amari, on the other hand, just crossed her arms with a deadpan look on her face. "You are such a show-off, Naru-kun," she replied bluntly, causing Naruto to deflate visibly. At least Kaguya looked proud of what he had done. Shaking his head, Naruto turned to watch Orochimaru and Inoki fleeing with their army while he eyed all the resurrected shinobi who were still on this realm of living. DSK, Naruto said to himself as he saw that the Edo Tensei shinobi hadn't been released from their restraint. "That Orochimaru. Leaving all the work for me." Saying that, he raised his palm towards the resurrected shinobi as he prepared his next move. Everyone watched with bated breaths as they thought that they were going to witness an incredible phenomenon once again. The whole area remained silent for a few minutes as they all waited for something to happen. They waited and waited and waited. Was something supposed to happen? The Nidaime Mizukage asked suddenly in curiosity. This time, it was Naruto who was wearing a baffled expression on his face as he eyed his palm in confusion. Narukoi Himuri called out to him in a calm voice. "Your Rinnegan is deactivated." "What?" Naruto exclaimed out in shock as he quickly turned back to her. "But I didn't deactivate it." In response, Kaguya merely created a crystal mirror which showed Naruto's normal eye, signifying the disappearance of his Rinnegan. "What the hell?" he cried out as he showed a freaked out expression at the disappearance of his Rinnegan. He then started to wave his arm around in a comical fashion. "Where did it go? Where did it go?" Amari sighed at her reborn brother's over-the-top reaction. "Calm down, Naru-kun. You are freaking out." Hearing her words, Naruto immediately stopped panicking as he took few deep breaths. He then regained his calm composure as he tried to find out why his Rinnegan disappeared. As he searched in his own body for the cause of this phenomenon, he immediately got the answer as to why his Rinnegan disappeared. The truth was that his Rinnegan didn't disappear in the first place. It was still there. It was his body that caused the rejection of all the power that he tried to filter through his soul into it. He had to remind himself that he didn't possess the same body that he used to in his previous life. His body, which could still be considered as being elite among the modern shinobi, was just unable to handle the pressure of his godly power that he had carried from his previous life. The maximum that he could his powers were for 5 minutes before his body starts reject those powers. It was really unfortunate as those powers were something that could only be matched by Kaguya herself. Naruto felt like crying over the unfairness of this life as he knew that he had to train his body from square one while having it adjust to the godly powers that his soul possessed. He had to make sure to slowly increase the time gap that he could use his power until he could do it with as much ease as breathing. With a resigned sigh, Naruto turned back towards Kaguya, who blinked at the sudden attention from her beloved son. Naruto felt his man points drop to a new low at asking help from his lover when he, as a man, could have done the same with his powers. "Kaheim, can you release the souls of these resurrected shinobi?" Kaguya blinked a few times before nodding back at him with a smile. "Of course." As she said this, she raised her hand towards all the resurrected shinobis, engulfing them in a bright light as their bodies started to crumble to dust. "Well," Nidaime Tsuchikage muttered, "I was at least able to see the power of God before going back." "True." Nidaime Mizukage agreed as his body started to vanish away. The bright light engulfed all the Edo Tensei shinobi, brightening the entire surrounding. After the light died down, only dust remained on the ground where all the resurrected shinobi once stood. Naruto watched the whole event with half-lidded eyes as he sighed depressingly to himself. Kaguya, who had been standing near Naruto, tilted her head curiously when she saw his action. "What happened, Sachikoi?" Naruto turned towards his mother before he once again sighed. "I feel as if my manly pride had taken a dip for being unable to do what you just did." Kaguya let smile appear on her lips when she heard the reason for his small bout of depression. Without speaking a word, she entered the personal space of her beloved while clasping on his hand before directing it to one of her breast. Unheeding to Naruto's wide eyes at her action, Kaguya moaned as soon as Naruto's hand touched her bosom through her robe. He was not given the chance to say anything else when his lips got engulfed by Kaguya's as she passionately shared a make-out with him in the middle of the battlefield. With her lips firmly sealed over his, her tongue revolved around in his own as she explored every corner of his mouth. Saliva were exchanged from their tongue lashing with each other, but they didn't care as they continued to share their passionate moment. Naruto relished the feeling of once again being able to feel the love from one of his lovers and he wasn't going to miss it for the world. After a brief lip lock, Kaguya retracted back while gazing at Naruto with her half-lidded lustful eyes. "Do you feel manly now, Sachikoi?" Naruto remained speechless for a few seconds at her dare act before a wide smirk dawned on his face as he gave a squeeze to her breast on which his hand still laid. Kaguya immediately moaned in response to his ministration as she grabbed a fistful of his hair while having already snaked her arms around his neck. "I'm going to show you how manly I am tonight, Kahaim," he whispered to her in a sensual tone that had the said woman shuddering a pleasurable manner. "Boy, you too." Himuri shouted at both of them in an irritated voice as her eyebrows twitched in slight jealousy. "Stop flirting in front of a public." That's when the reality crashed back on Naruto as he looked back at the audience for whom he and Kaguya had put up a sexy show. Most of the people had already fainted with a massive nosebleed, while the others were staring at him with wide unhinged jaws with prominent blushes staining their faces. Jiraiya, who was giggling madly in a perverted manner, was furiously scribbling in his notebook while repeatedly muttering gold mine and research as his mantra. Kakashi, who had been inactive during the whole battle, was now staring at the blonde with a proud-eye smile on his face while give him a thumbs up. "Fuck." Naruto summarized his thoughts with one word as he saw the chaos that he had inadvertently unleashed. Tsunade, who was nursing a growing headache, looked tiredly at the blonde Uzumaki. "Naruto, how did you gain all that power?" she asked him in confusion and curiosity. After seeing all that she had during the entire day, she doubted she could be once again shocked by anything. "And the Rinnegan?" Jiraiya interjected as he momentarily shrugged away his perverted antics while donning a serious expression. "How do you possess the Rinnegan?" Naruto scratched the back of his head as he pondered on how to break the news to all his friends and close people, with the end result of them having their brain being short-circuited. He then decided to go the straight way. "Those powers are something that I possessed in my previous life. A life where I was known by the name of Naruto Utsutsuki." All those who heard Naruto reasoning just stared blankly at him as they tried to comprehend his words. Utsutsuki. Tsunade mumbled blankly before she glanced at the three women who were smiling happily and lovingly at Naruto. She knew the meaning behind bearing that name. As she pondered on her thoughts, she turned towards the blonde with confusion and bafflement evident on her face. "What? How?" "It's a long story," he replied back with a sheepish smile while scratching the back of his head. Both Tsunade and Jiraiya stared at Naruto for a few seconds before they turned towards each other with their respective blank expressions. "We need sake." Chapter 2. Resetting. The aftermath of the battle that took place near Konoha was nothing short of chaotic. Escaping from the incoherent shouting and murmurings of a large shinobi population from the battlefield, Naruto had been immediately bombarded by all his friends and comrades on his miraculous feat of single-handedly managing an entire army while throwing everybody off the loop with his sudden godly powers. Naruto still didn't know how he escaped from all that, but he was thankful for the respite nonetheless. After a short greeting session with Gaara, who was a fellow Jinchuriki, he had been whisked away by Tsunade and Jiraiya to the Hokage office, with all three of his lovers obviously not willing to take their eyes off him, which also led to them following him into Tsunade's office. But all these were not the matter of conversation at the moment. "So let me get this straight," Swan started as she sat on her Hokage chair while feeling a migraine starting to invade her head as she looked at Naruto. "This life of yours is actually your rebirth. And, in your previous life, you were a living god. The fact that the term god originated from you is no less baffling. And when you died, those three," she then sharply pointed towards the three Utsutsuki women, "went ballistic over your death, where Kaguya tried to project an illusion all over the globe using the moon, just so she could create a world where you never died. And, in an epic all-out fight, her two daughters sealed her away, while also sealing themselves in the process, so that all three of them would be unsealed again when a true Rinnegan user would appear again near the seal, which just so happened to be at the location of the previous battle." Try as she might, she just couldn't keep off the incredulousness from her voice as she summarized the story and the reason behind the appearance of the three Utsutsuki women, as well as Naruto's sudden bout of power show. That just about sums it up. Although, he then exasperatedly looked at his three lovers, who looked as if they were mere children being scolded by their parent. "I never thought things would go so downhill after my death." Amari looked a bit disappointed at getting scolded by her love, while Himuri held a sad look on her face as she thought on how far all three of them had went in their battle. The guy looked down, with a frown marring her face. "I had actually silently consented to being sealed by both of them after I learned that all of us would once again be unsealed when a true Rinnegan user would appear near the seal." Her face then darkened a bit. "I had thought that with three of us being sealed, the only other being possessing the Rinnegan would be you if you were to ever come back. But what I got was one of Indra's chakra transmigrant, Madara Che." Naruto blinked a bit at that information. "Madara was my son's chakra transmigrant. Wow, I didn't realize that at the battlefield." "Your son," Tsunade slowly drawled before her eyebrows started to twitch furiously. "Oh, right. You are practically the ancestor of the entire shinobi race." When she got a sheepish grin from the blonde, Tsunade just shook her head in exasperation. It was official now. This brat was hazardous for her mental health. It was a miracle that she was still sane. Jiraiya, throughout the entire conversation, had surprisingly remained silent. But he had his own reasons for doing so, considering the fact that he looked quite pale while trying to hold his nose that still dripped with few drops of blood. A clear case of nosebleed due to extreme perverted thoughts. He finally decided to break his silence when he looked at Naruto with a perverted grin. Having an incestuous relationship with sisters and mother, now that's a total paradise. He shouted out in a gleeful tone. Hearing this, Tsunade looked a second short of bashing her former teammate. Naruto's face twitched in slight irritation at his godfather's usual antic, but he also held a mild, exasperated yet fond smile on his face. After all, it was his perverseness that defined Jiraiya. Anyways, Tsunade diffused the situation as her face turned serious while looking at Naruto. Naruto, you do know that Konoha will now be the focus of the entire shinobi world with the presence of these three. Moreover, your achievements by now might have spread across the entire shinobi subcontinent. I know. Naruto held a calm look on his face as he released a short sigh. Which is why I have decided that no matter what happens, Himari, Himuri and Kaguya would always be there in Konoha. In short, he silently relayed the message that he would be going out of the village without the three of them. Are you nuts? Himari shouted, more like screamed at Naruto while wearing an outraged look on her face. Naruto, you can't hold onto your powers for more than 5 minutes. After that, what will you do? Even though she had shouted this out in anger, her worry for him was clearly visible on her face. It was a worry that was also mirrored on Himuri's and Kaguya's faces. Naruto just calmly smirked at all three of them while holding a confident look. And you do know that those 5 minutes are enough for me to level this entire elemental subcontinent, don't you? But they refused to believe his words as all three of them tried to protest his decision with their incessant shouting. When it looked like they were not going to stop anytime soon or accept his decision, Naruto decided that he had enough. Silence. Naruto's roar echoed throughout the whole room, leaving not only his three lovers into stunned silence, but also Tsunade and Jiraiya into a shocked state as they had never seen this side of Naruto. Naruto looked at his sisters and mother with his narrowed eyes. Need I remind you three who the patriarch of this family is? When he was met with silence, he nodded in satisfaction to himself. Thought so. After few moments, Himuri broke the silence in the room with a blush clearly visible on her face. I'm so hot and bothered by Naruto becoming so serious like that. Kaguya lustfully looked at Naruto while rubbing together her thighs in an erotic manner. I love it when Sachikoi is so dominating. Himari didn't say anything to add up to Himuri and Kaguya as she stood at her place with her own blush. Jiraiya was the first one to break out of his stupor as he started to perversely giggle at the entire group. Naruto dominating his mother and sisters. Jiraiya's mind had immediately gone down the gutter. Tsunade just sank back into her seat as if she had visibly deflated out of energy. It was clear that she was having a major headache with the way she was holding her head. Naruto just sighed at the chaotic direction his life was turning towards. Not a word anymore. After the whole meeting in the Hokage office, Naruto had hightailed from there in his attempt to escape from the suffocating cuddling that he would get from the three Utsutsuki. It was not that he didn't love their shower of affection over him. After all, he had been the recipient of such a thing in his previous life. But, he couldn't help but wonder if they were escalating it to new level at the moment. Not that he could blame them for such a thing. He knew why they were being overly possessive and affectionate. His death, which had left them with a hollow heart, had made them take extreme measures. And now that they were once again with him, they were afraid of losing him again. The end result of which was them being clingier than ever. Although it was endearing to see such a thing, it was also irritating nonetheless. While walking through the street of Konoha, he noticed the look of awe and reverence in the eyes of villagers he passed by. It was a look which was a complete contrast to the ones they held a few years ago. And the trigger for such a phenomenon was his godly feat of defeating an entire coalition army and protecting the Konoha village all by himself. It was a feat they couldn't ignore, which is why they now held respect for him. Naruto inwardly smiled as things were starting to look bright for him, with the villagers now starting to respect him. As he mused on all these while walking through the street of Konoha, he was suddenly pulled into a dark alleyway by a hand. The action was so sudden and surprising that Naruto couldn't help but let out a yelp at the action. What the hell? He yelled out as he prepared to dish out his powers on the unlucky fellow who had tried to kidnap him. Who the fuck? His words died down in his throat when he got a good look on the figure who had whisked him away from the crowded street. 4 figures to be exact. All of whom were women and were glaring at him heatedly. These 4 women were exceptional beauties who were generally desired by the majority of the male population of Konoha village. But sadly for them, all 4 of them already had their eyes set on someone else. Naruto gulped a bit when he saw his kidnappers. Anko, Kurenai, Yugao, Hana. When he said the names of all 4 of them, their glares seemed to intensify even more. After all, he committed the biggest possible mistake of not having contact with them as soon as he returned. Amidst their glare, Naruto idly wondered if it was not too late to dash out of the village. Of course, tactical retreat being the need of the situation. Naruto Uzumaki never runs away. He was not a coward. Naruto Kurenai called out his name with a scowl etched on her face. It was something that he could clearly see on the faces of the other three. What's all this that we heard and saw? Tempting his luck, Naruto decided to try an escape tactic. What did you heard and saw? Don't play dumb with us, Naruto. An escape tactic which failed epically. Yugao then looked at him with such a sad expression on her face that it made Naruto visibly flinch. Naruto, she addressed him in a soft voice while holding a delicate face. Do we mean nothing to you anymore? What Naruto stammered back at the question as if he had been punched in the gut. Don't say that. You girls are one of my few precious people. You girls are my childhood friends. He didn't know why, but the moment he uttered the word friends, all four women gave out visible flinches. It was a bit unfortunate for the four beauties, but even with the added experience of his previous life, Naruto was still as dense as a brick when it came to recognizing a woman's feeling. The proof of which was how oblivious Naruto was to his sister's and mother's feelings during the first half of his previous life. It literally took his mother raping the hell out of him to realize how they felt towards him. Enko held a sad smile as she looked down at the ground with a soft look. But it certainly looks like those three women had replaced the four of us in your life. Naruto held back a frustrated sigh that threatened to come out. Look, no one is going to. So this is why we couldn't find you. Some harlots dared to kidnap our husband. At the sudden intrusion of a voice, Naruto turned around to see Himari, along with Himuri and Kaguya, standing there with an angry look. Give me a break. Naruto screamed out in his mind as he saw how this entire situation had turned out to be the worst possible scenario. Can't I have one peaceful moment in my life? With an exhausted face, Naruto turned towards Himari. Himari, please don't make the situation. Husband? Hana said with her narrowed eyes as she glared at the Hyuga ancestor. We have known him since his childhood. And as far as I know, he had never married anyone. Our bond and marriage transcends beyond this life. Himuri stated to the four Konoha women calmly, though there was a hint of steel in her voice as she viewed all four of them like they were some kind of competition. Then flash news for you, Anko came up with her devil-may-cry attitude as she didn't look the least bit intimidated by the priestess of six paths. We don't care what you did in your previous life because what matters is the current life. You're starting to irritate me. Kaguya also joined the frame while wearing an annoyed expression on her face. Her possessive attitude was resurfacing as she saw how these four women were interested in her son. Naruto looked at the proceedings with a detached look on his face. As he saw that both sides were unwilling to back down from their bickering, he let out a resigned sigh. I don't even have the luxury of saying mommy in such a situation. He mumbled to himself while glancing at Kaguya as an emphasis for his remark. As he saw the heated argument between his mother, sisters and his childhood friend, he couldn't help but think on how emotionally fragile both the parties must be. While his lovers from his previous life had indeed gone through the trauma of him dying once, it was his four childhood friends that needed the attention right now. He knew how they must be feeling right now. After all, he had also gone through his fair share of experiencing the fear of no longer being important to his precious people. The fact that these four Konoha beauties never allowed him to feel such a thing when it came to them showed how much they cared for him. And now, it was his turn to return the favor. Enough. He shouted out, causing the entire argument between the two groups to come to a halt. When he saw that they were not going to continue anytime soon, he continued. Himuri, Himari, Kaguya. The three of you should go back to my apartment. I will meet you there after I finish talking with these four. The three Utsutsuki women seemed to protest this decision as they held their ground. Kaguya seemed to be the first one to voice her protest. Sachikoi, you can't expect us to leave you with these harlots. They can. It's my order. Naruto roared out as he held a furious look for the first time in a long while. Or are you telling me that you three no longer heed to my words? His three lovers were reduced to stunned silence as they held shocked expressions on their visages. After which, they backed down from their protest with hesitating looks. We understand, Narukoi. Himari said softly as both Himari and Kaguya mirrored her expression. Even though they didn't like leaving the man they loved with some other women, they had to follow his words. Weird as it may sound, Naruto's words were law in the Utsutsuki family. Naruto sighed tiredly as he looked at his three lovers. I'm sorry for being so forceful, but please comply with me on this. It's necessary that I do this. The three Utsutsuki women nodded back at him with faint smiles, signifying that they understood his words. With that, they turned around and walked off to their new home. After watching his mother and sisters going away to his apartment, Naruto turned back towards his childhood friends. Enko. he called out to the woman. When he gained the attention of said woman, he continued, let's continue our talk in your apartment. The four women didn't say anything in response as they silently agreed on his decision. Enko's apartment. The apartment was still the same as he remembered. He reminisced the times when he used to be brought here. Not just here, but to the homes of his other three friends. Particularly at events like his birthday. His four childhood friends always went out of their way to ensure that he never felt lonely. And he couldn't be less thankful for it. As they sat in couches and chairs in a round formation against each other, Naruto wondered on how to start this conversation. He then decided to give it a try. So how are you girls? Naruto felt himself wincing at his own pathetic try. Enko snorted when she heard her crush's words. If that is your attempt at starting this conversation, then you are failing spectacularly, Whisker-chan. Naruto merely gave a sheepish grin to all those present there, to which all of them released exasperated sighs at Naruto's goofiness. Though, inwardly, Naruto felt himself sighing in relief when he heard Anko's nickname for him. It at least meant that she was not overly furious with him. At least you are still the same. Yugao said with a fond smile as she looked at Naruto. The action made Naruto blush a little in embarrassment, but she didn't pay heed to it as slowly a forlorn expression appeared on her face. But it seems that's not the case with us as it looks like we have been replaced. That again. Naruto groaned out as he heard the same remark from the street where they had been conversing. Just why do you girls think like that? Isn't it obvious, Naruto-kun? Hana stated with a sad expression. We are no longer needed in your life. Those three women seem to be more important to you than we are. Whatever retort Naruto had in his mind died down in his throat when he thought on those words. It might be true that the three Utsutsuki women were important to him. As Naruto Utsutsuki, those three were the only women in his life and he had never needed anyone else. They were his entire world. But that was no longer the case. He was Naruto Uzumaki now. And, in this life, these four women had their importance to him. In a much more deeper level than he had thought. That's where you are wrong. Naruto's whisper carried across the whole room, making all the four women widen their eyes in shock at his words. Those three are important to me. There's no doubt about that. But you girls are also as much important to me. Naruto Anko whispered, while feeling her eyes brim with tears at his words. Her three companions were also in the same state. Naruto smiled softly at them as he reminisced on all the times these four girls had been there for him. When the whole village had shunned him, leaving him isolated, these four had been the ones to comfort him back to his cheerful state. Something that not even Sandaime Hokage, his foster grandfather, had been able to do. My childhood was filled with the burden of the ostracism of this whole village. I often associated my childhood with that of darkness. He then felt a faint smile coming to lips as he looked at all the four girls with a fond smile. But there had always been a shimmer of light in that darkness, and that light was the four of you. At once, all four women gasped slightly as they heard the heartfelt words of the boy for whom they were starting to fall. It was because of you four that I escaped from falling into the unending depths of the darkness in my life. It's because you four were the light of my life. He felt his mind going haywire with the level of emotion he currently had. These four women in this life meant as much to him as the three Utsutsuki women in his previous life. And he couldn't afford to lose them. Please don't take away that light from me. His voice, despite his control, was starting to crack up. Please don't take away the light of my life. I need you all because you all are still important to me. The room remained silent for a few seconds before Anko stood up from her place and walked over to him. Anko? Naruto questioned her in confusion as he saw her standing in front of him. That was the final strike you could land upon me, Naruto. She said with a tearful smile as his remarkable words still rang in her head. Final what? Naruto asked dumbly while trying to understand her words. But, his eyes soon widened in shock. The reason for this was because Anko had engulfed his lips with her own in a kiss while snaking her arms around his neck in a lover's embrace. His whole mind had been reduced to mush as Anko passionately continued her kiss. After a few moments, she slowly retracted herself from him. Just when he thought that it was over, he was once again engulfed into another kiss, this time by the courtesy of Kurenai. And this process continued until Yugao and Hana also got their fair share. The dumbfounded Naruto tried to compute the event that transpired right now as he sat idly at his seat. He was confused at the sudden turn of events that transpired moments ago. He was left perplexed at the sudden shower of extreme affection from his four childhood friends. He had so many questions swirling through his mind that he found his head revolving slightly. But, of all the questions he had to ask, he decided to ask the dumbest of all. Weren't you girls jealous of each other at what happened right now? He asked them meekly before he lowered his head while mumbling to himself. Not that I understand women even after all this time. As far as he knew, whenever a woman saw a man with whom she had shared affectionate moments, having a tender moment with another woman, then it was given that she would go ballistic. It was kind of a universal truth. Hana smiled a bit brightly at him. We couldn't get jealous of each other, Naruto-kun. She then held a fond look on her face, as if recalling a good memory. Not when we know that you have given equal attention to all four of us since our childhood. Naruto blushed a bit in embarrassment when he received equal loving looks from all four women. But he also inwardly sighed in relief at the way things had turned out. No cries of outrage, no maimed bodies. At least all was well for the moment. It had been some peaceful days since the eventful day of invasion, along with his emotional confrontations with his lovers from his past life and also his childhood friend. Since that day, he had taken extra measure in avoiding the possibility of both the groups meeting each other again. After all, he had been quite concerned over the health of his four childhood friends after their face-off with the three Utsutsuki women. He sometimes worried if his mother and sisters would take extreme measures in their possessiveness over him. That aside, he had taken up to strengthening his body to new levels so that he could handle the pressures of his godly powers. It had even yielded the results, with his body being top conditioned to the level of shinobi monsters like Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha. Training with three goddesses like Himari, Himuri and Kaguya does produce results like that. His training had continued in the newly formed Uzumaki mansion, close to the Hokage monument. It was an ultra-sized mansion that sprung up out of nowhere in a barren land that existed there. The wonders of the Rinnegan. But so far, even with all the training he had gone through, he just couldn't summon up his powers like he had done a few days ago at the battlefield. And the frustration over this was being clearly shown. Fuck. Naruto cursed out loud as he jumped back from his position and panted in exhaustion at his failed attempt to bring out his powers at full strength. Kaguya, who had been his opponent so far, stood opposite to him with no clear signs of exhaustion. She looked as if she was taking a walk in the park. You need to rest, Narukoi. Himuri said in a concerned tone. Naruto had been quite relentless in his training to regain his former glory. He even thought the results were tremendous so far. Himuri, along with her mother and sister, worried over his state of health, which he constantly pushed to the edge in his training. This is useless. Naruto muttered to himself as he tried to regain his breathing. I can't summon my powers like before. I need a real-life situation to be pushed to the edge if I have to re-summon my powers. His training, even though useful for his shinobi skills, didn't provide him the edge that would make his godly powers resurface again. He needed real-life experience now if he wanted to re-summon his powers. There is a way, Himuri whispered in an extremely low voice. Though, there was a clear hesitation in her tone. Quite understandable, considering the fact that her idea could put her husband in danger. And what's that? Naruto perked up with an interested look. Kaguya and Himari too turned their attention towards the Rikidou Nizu. I have been keeping an eye on all the events across the shinobi world as a faint chakra transmigrant till my revival. And I know of one such event that would give you the edge. Her voice then showed a clear sign of hesitation, as if she herself didn't want to say this. You could join the civil war that's going on in Mizuno-kuni. Himuri. Himari cried out in outrage, while showing her disagreement to her sister's words. Are you trying to send our husband to a war in his power-stripped state? You don't need to remind me that always. Naruto muttered out in a moody tone. Others ignored his words as they all conversed among themselves. Kaguya was visibly scowling at Himuri for even suggesting something like sending her beloved son to a war when he didn't even have access to his powers. But not like I like it. Himuri defended herself against her sister and mother. But even you have to agree that he needs his powers back. That way we won't have to worry over his safety if he regained his powers. Both Himari and Kaguya remained silent at her words. They both knew what Himuri said was right, but their hearts were unwilling to accept this fact. They had already lost Naruto once. They couldn't afford to do so twice. It's decided. Naruto suddenly intervened with a commanding tone in his voice. I'm going to Mizuno-kuni to participate in this civil war. It has its own upsides, with the prominent being that I could have the chance of re-summoning my powers back. The fact that if all turns out well, then Konoha could gain an ally in the form Kurigakure no Sado. But that Senju would protest your decision. Himari reminded him of this fact. While she was still reluctant to send Naruto off to a war, she just couldn't go against his decision. You can't go out of this village without a permission, not without being labeled as a missing nin. I know. Naruto replied with a smirk. A smirk that told of untold amount of mischief. Which is why when I would go out of this village, I would be dumping the blame on Jiraiya. All three women there blinked in confusion before looking at him curiously. How? They chorused in unison. I have a plan. He replied with his smirk never leaving his face. He then turned towards Kaguya. I might need your help in this, Kahaim. Blinking in surprise at his request, Kaguya nodded back at him in consent. Near Konoha's hot spring. Jiraiya perversely giggled to himself at the sight of naked women in the hot spring as he hid himself on the branch of a tree. Konoha really was producing good material for him these days. Hey Iro-senin. Jiraiya almost jumped out of his place at the voice before looking down to see Naruto standing below him with his raised eyebrows. While thumping his chest to calm his rapidly beating heart, Jiraiya glared at his godson. Don't scare me like that, brat. After a few calm breathes, he once again glanced at the blonde, this time a bit curiously. What do you need, Naruto? Just come down, and I will tell you. Raising a visible eyebrow in confusion, Jiraiya conceded as he jumped down from the branch to land in front of Naruto. Now tell me, what is it? Naruto released a big sigh before he produced a document out of his pocket. Can you sign on this paper? Raising an eyebrow curiously, Jiraiya took the document into his hand before going through it. By the time he was finished, his eyes were narrowed as he looked at Naruto. What's the meaning of this, Naruto? Who wants to go out of the village on my responsibility? Naruto ducked his head down a little as he showed a blush that was clearly staining his cheeks. It's for a Kunoichi. He weakly mumbled in a low tone. Kunoichi? Jiraiya blinked in confusion before he got a good look at the way Naruto was behaving at the moment. He felt a grin threatening to widen on his face. Ho, you got hooked with some Kunoichi in this village. Having an affair behind your mother's and sister's back. He said to his godson while wiggling his eyebrow suggestively at him. Naruto rubbed his neck with an embarrassed look on his face. Yeah, something like that. And, you would also get a reward if you sign this paper. Reward? Jiraiya repeated with an interested look now dawning on his face as he glanced down at the document in his hand. Yeah. Naruto nodded in affirmative. He then brought his face close to Jiraiya's ears as if he was going to reveal the biggest secret of the century. Apparently, there is an organization of a large number of Kunoichi of this village who give reward to the ones who have done a favor to one of their member. Jiraiya felt his eyes threatening to pop out of its socket when he heard this. He then looked at Naruto as if he was talking about the Holy Grail. You don't mean? Naruto then smirked at him in a superior manner. Come with me, Iro-senin. I will show you the place. Jiraiya was a bit too eager in complying with Naruto's request. Isn't this the women's spa building? Jiraiya asked curiously as he looked at the said building. Damn, this is one of the only building where I was unable to spy until now. And for a good reason too, Iro-senin. Naruto said with a smile. This is one of most tight-packed building in the whole village because the things that happen inside are something that no outsider is aware of. A smirk then appeared on his lips. And you would get a mind-blowing reward if you sign that paper. Jiraiya gulped a bit in anxiety and excitement. And what is this reward? Naruto put a hand on his chin as he made a mock-thinking pose. Let me guess. A pleasant night filled with babes that you could only peek at up until now. Jiraiya felt his eyes widening to impossible proportion when he heard Naruto's answer. Even consisting of a harem of 15 to 20 Kunoichi who would give you all kinds of pleasure. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. Jiraiya shouted out with his excitement at an all-time high. Good. Naruto replied with a smile as he tilted his head towards the document. Then please sign the paper while saying that I'm taking responsibility for this Konoha ninja going out of the village for a considerable time. Jiraiya frantically fumbled on the document as he eagerly signed the document with full consent. After which, he gave the document back to Naruto while wearing an excited grin. Naruto nodded in satisfaction as he went through the document. Good. He then turned towards Jiraiya with a smile as he took out a pass. Here's your ticket to paradise, Iro-senin. Jiraiya swiftly snatched the ticket into his hands as he held it like it was the Holy Bible. He then looked at the building in front of him with a massive grin. Paradise, here I come. As Jiraiya entered the building, he probably never saw the mischievous smirk on Naruto's face. As Jiraiya entered the building, he was greeted to the sight of a woman standing at the counter. Damn, even the counter woman was a smoking babe. He was going to milk this for all it was worth. This is a valid pass. She then looked up at him with a smile on her face. Please enjoy your visit. And, the moment for which he had been waiting for arrived as the door opened up. With that, he was greeted to the sight of a true paradise. Naked women. All around. And they were all the sexy Kunoichi of this village. Jiraiya felt his eyes tearing up at the sight of the paradise in front of him. Oh, Jiraiya-sama. You helped one of us. Now let us help you. Jiraiya felt a large grin tearing up his face as he saw naked women all around, willing to pleasure him at moment's notice. This is true paradise. He shouted out in a loud voice as if he had been granted his biggest wish. Now I'm going to eat you all up. It was when he said this that something strange started to occur. The area around him distorted a bit as the hair of all the women started to de-length to man's proportion. and, to his growing confusion and horror, started to sprout out of the crouches of all the naked women as their breasts started to flatten to broad chest. What the? Jiraiya stared at the scene in front of him with a pure horrified expression on his face as right in front of his eyes, all the women had turned into men. It was then that he found out that he was in the men's spa. One of the men looked at Jiraiya with disgust in his eyes. I never thought Jiraiya-sama was a gay. And to think that he was a pervert who lusted after women. One of the men, who was a bit on the edge of femininity, looked at Jiraiya with a freakish grin. To come here and shout that I'm going to eat you all. How bold of you. He said, while batting his eyelash that made other men near him puke. With each second that he had lived through this nightmare, Jiraiya's eyes continued to grow wider in horror until he was unable to take it anymore. Ooh. It was with a gasp that Jiraiya came out of the building of living nightmare. When he dared to glance back at the building he had been to just now, he noticed one major change in the hoarding over it. Men's spa. Jiraiya voiced his confusion in his thought as he read the sign on the hoarding. But when did I? Jiraiya. Tsunade's roar boomed across the whole village as the mentioned Toad Sennin visibly shook at his place at the level of anger that was present in that call. He didn't know what he did wrong this time, but it was now recommended for him to flee from this place if he didn't want to face his former teammates' wrath. Sadly, luck was not on Jiraiya's side as the female Hokage quickly caught up to the Toad Sennin as she came running towards him. When she reached him, she stood in front of him with a furious look on her face. Jiraiya. Tsunade shouted out in a furious tone. What's the meaning of this? Jiraiya forgot the momentary scare he had as he blinked in confusion. What are you talking about, Tsunade? This. While shouting out, Tsunade thrusted the document she had in her hand towards Jiraiya. With a frown of confusion, Jiraiya scanned through the document he had in his hand. Quickly he realized that this was the same document Naruto had handed him to take his signature, with a visible difference of a change in the name of the shinobi in it. It was then that Jiraiya realized that not only had he been fooled by Naruto into signing his legal departure from this village, but he was also epically pranked concerning the secret Kunoichi organization. Slowly crumbling the document into his hand, Jiraiya's face burned red with embarrassment while shouting out to the whole village. Naruto. Naruto's ears twitched slightly as if he had heard something, but he ignored it as he glanced back at Kaguya, who had came to drop him off to Mizuno Kuni. Who needed traveling when you could teleport from one end of the world to another? Thanks, Kahime. Naruto said to her with a smile. You can go back to Konoha. For the first time in a long while, Kaguya gave a visible pout as if she was trying to resist the decision. Please let me stay with you, Sachikoi. Naruto shook his head in slight exasperation before closed his face towards her and gave her a breathtaking kiss. After few moments of their kiss, Naruto retracted back with a smile on his face. Now you would go back, wouldn't you? A bit satisfied by the kiss, Kaguya slightly nodded. Please take care. She bid her goodbye in a concerned tone. Naruto nodded back. I will. He reassured her with his smile. Nodding at his reassurance, she vanished away from the place as if she had never been here in the first place. Releasing a sigh, Naruto turned towards the location of the camp where Rebels faction resided. According to Himuri, they had the visible chance at victory. Of course, if you include him into the equation. Naruto released a sigh before he started walking. Bloody mist, here I come. Mei Terumi, who was an exceptional auburn-haired beauty with one of her hairbang covering her right eye, didn't know what to do in such a situation as she sat in her chair. In front of her stood a young man with blonde hair who claimed that he had come to help her faction. While any help to her force was indeed a boon, she also couldn't help but be mindful of the fact that this guy could be a spy. She was proud of her musing by Ao's voice. Just how do we know that you are not a spy? Ao questioned in a crude tone as he stared at the blonde-haired man with his narrowed eyes. Also, just who are you? Naruto scratched his head in a mild dilemma. I don't exactly have any proof to convince you that I'm not a spy. But I could at least tell you who I am. His posture then straightened a bit as the noble and powerful aura from his previous life started to seep out of his body. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, a shinobi of Konohagakure no Sado. I have been sent here on behalf of my village to assist you. That last remark was obviously a lie. But they didn't need to know that. Both the occupants of the camp widened their eyes when they heard his name. You're Naruto Uzumaki. Ao shouted out as he held a baffled expression. The one who single-handedly defeated the combined army of Iwa and Odo. Naruto rubbed his neck as a sudden embarrassed look came over him. I might be, I guess. He said with a humble smile on his face. Both the occupant now got enough proof that Naruto Uzumaki was not a spy. His feet had really spread across the whole elemental subcontinent. A person who is rumored to possess godly powers didn't need shady tactics to defeat someone like them. Plus, his affiliation with Konoha helped his case too. Maybe that village silently decided to join the rebel side by sending their one-man army. Mei calmed down from her stunned state as she saw how humble Naruto was and didn't even brag about his exceptional powers. It was actually cute to see him flustered over a rightful praise. Mei now reverted back to her original personality as she stared at Naruto with her half-lidded eyes. Powerful, humble and handsome. You are quite the mix, aren't you? She purred out in the end in a sensual manner. Naruto blushed at the way the rebel leader spoke to him. The fact that she was extremely beautiful didn't help the matter at all. Even though he still held a critical look, Ao decided to welcome Naruto into their group. It's good you have you on our side, Naruto-san. He said with a nod. Naruto responded back with a smile. Thank you, Ao-san. Ao seemed as if he had more to say as he continued, as you can see, Mei-sama welcomes a man like you, even after all this time. Mei froze a bit when she heard Ao's words in discreet packets. Mei-sama man like you after all this time. Naruto's sweat dropped a bit at Ao's words. I see. Yes, Ao nodded to himself. At this age, a man like you who is able to defeat an army is needed at our side. I'm sure Mei-sama appreciates a man like you. Mei, who had been silent all this time, felt her eyebrows twitching even more. At this age Mei-sama appreciates a man like you. For a woman of 21 years of age like her to be taunted on old age. Unacceptable. Ao, Mei said in a chilling voice as she glared at the said man. Shut up or I'll kill you. Ao blanched back at her words. What did I do? It had been few days since his inclusion into the rebel faction. While some were wary of him, others were in awe of his achievement and feats that he had accomplished by defeating the combined army of Iwa and Odo. It was during this time that an important assignment came forward. Are you sure about this? Mei asked for affirmative, which she gained from one of rebel faction member who was standing in front of her. The concentrate heavy amount of bombs and weapons near our camp, Naruto's eyes narrowed a bit as he thought on Yagura's, the fourth Mizukage's motive. They are definitely not taking half measures. Mei sank back on her chair as she held a contemplative look on her face. We can't send a large group of our faction to take care of it. Yagura could take advantage of the shortage in our forces in our camp. Naruto gained an idea. Why don't we both go and take care of this? Just the both of us, along with this guy who has seen this place. He said, while tilting his head in the direction of the one who had reported to Mei about this whole weapon matter. Mei held a thoughtful expression on her face as she thought on this. Maybe you are right. She consented to Naruto's idea. In this manner, there wouldn't be shortage in our army. And we are both powerful enough to deal with this. As they both agreed on this decision, they didn't notice the narrowing of the eyes of the third person in the camp. As Naruto, along with Mei, stood at a place with slight vegetation there, they both held confused expressions on their visage. Where is the weapon concentration? Mei asked as she looked around the area as if searching for a clue on the said weapons. Isn't this the right place? Naruto pondered on this before he turned to look at the person who brought them here. Hey, aren't you the one? It was then he got to see him edging away from them while already having covered large distance. It was also with this that Naruto came to a startling realization. Shit. Naruto cursed out, which brought the attention of Mei, who was facing the other way. He then turned towards the auburn-haired beauty. Mei. We had a traitor among us. Mei felt her lone visible eye widening before her head snapped towards the now former rebel shinobi who had distanced himself from them. Why you bastard? Mei shouted out as she felt the stung of one of her own shinobi betraying her. They were not given the chance to say anything else as the area was quickly filled with a smoke that engulfed them. What the? Mei said while trying to see through the smoke. But she quickly felt her body going limp as she dropped down to the ground. The effects of the smoke, which was obviously a poisonous gas, were clearly starting to act up. Naruto dropped down to his knees as he tried to control his rapidly failing body. What the hell? He screamed in his mind as he tried to regain his body functions. A Jinchuriki like me should be unaffected by the poisonous gas. After this whole event transpired, many shinobi came out of their hiding as they grouped around the traitorous rebel shinobi. You must be thinking that a Jinchuriki like you should be unaffected by this. Isn't that right, Naruto Uzumaki? A shinobi taunted him from a distance while holding a victorious smirk. We know all about your Jinchuriki status. Another stated as he looked down at him. But sadly for you, this gas also affects a Jinchuriki like you. It's the end for both of you. The one who had betrayed both him and Mei stated in a victorious tone. With the death of both of you, rebel faction would surely crumble down. Damn it. Naruto mumbled weakly to himself as he tried to regain his control over his body. But no matter how he tried, he felt his body slowly going limp. It was then that he heard a voice coming from his companion. Naruto Mei called out to him in a defeated tone as she tried to use all her strength to crawl towards him. Mei. Naruto yelled out as with difficulty, he closed the distance between himself and the rebel leader. After much difficulty, he succeeded in his endeavor as he held the weakened body of Mei in his arms. Naruto, she looked at him with a vulnerable expression on her visage. We might not make it from here. Naruto was quite shaken up by the vulnerable look on Mei's face. He had always thought of her as a strong woman. And now, for her to wear such an expression just felt wrong. Don't say that, Mei. There might be a way out of this. Mei smiled sincerely at him, as with all her strength, she raised her hand to rest it on his cheek. You are a good man, Naruto. Any woman would be lucky to have you. Mei? Naruto asked with a frown, as he thought on how defeated she looked now. Which is why, let me have my first kiss with you, before I could die. Naruto felt his eyes widen at her, as he opened his mouth to chastise her on giving up so easily. But no words escaped his mouth, as it had been engulfed by the lips of one Mei Terumi. Her tongue penetrated into his mouth as it tried to explore every corner of his mouth. For Mei, this was a blissful moment as she enjoyed her first kiss. The fact that it was with someone like Naruto made it all the more sweet. Naruto felt his whole body freeze up as his mouth was being savored by the auburn-haired beauty in his arms. He felt his blood boiling up while feeling something trying to come to the surface. An unusual warmth spread from his soul to his whole body as he felt a familiar sensation. The sensation of being complete again. As his kiss ended with Mei, his eyes were glowing with an untold amount of power. Naruto? Mei questioned at the sudden change of demeanor and power level in Naruto. Though it frightened her a bit, it also excited her in a way she had never experienced before. Naruto glanced at Mei with his glowing eyes before smiling down warmly at her. Don't worry, Mei. We will get out of this safely. His eyes then closed for a bit before opening back to reveal his Rinnegan in all its glory. I will save you. Mei looked entranced at his eyes as a blush slowly crept up on her face at his words. Naruto. He then shifted his gaze to glare at all the opponents that were standing in front of him as his Rinnegan eyes glowed with unholy amount of power. You pests are going to pay for this mishap. I can't believe it. One Kiri shinobi shouted out as he stared at Naruto with a frightened expression. The rumors were true. Oh my god. This guy really has the Rinnegan. I don't want to face him. But it was bit too late for them as Naruto held out his hand in front of them with his power visibly swirling around him. Then, in a massive jerk, a huge funnel of blue energy originated from him that spread throughout the whole area while engulfing all the enemy shinobi in its path. When all of it ended, no trace of those shinobi was left behind. It was as if they were wiped away from the face of the earth. Mei held an amazed and astounded look on her face as she saw all that transpiring in front of her eyes. She then turned towards Naruto with a flabbergasted expression. I didn't know you could do that. Naruto gazed at the ground with his narrowed eyes as his Rinnegan eyes faced away. Even though he willfully vanished his powers away this time, he could feel his powers once again disappearing into the depths of his soul. It's complicated. He replied back to Mei's remark as he contemplated on what the trigger to his power was. All this week, he had been unsuccessfully trying to bring out his power that he wielded in his previous life. The powers that made him a god. But, in the end, all he was able to do was filter a mere tiny fraction of that power. It was minute compared to what he had at disposal. It was as if the powers had a subconscious mind that came out when certain conditions were met or a trigger was activated. Just what that trigger was left him quite confused. The last time he had been able to activate his powers were after. Naruto felt his eyes threatening to go into his hairline when he realized one important fact. The last time he had been able to activate his power was when he had gone through his steamy moments with his mother and sister. And now, at the face of the death, he shared an intimate moment with Mei, which activated his powers. No way. Naruto thought to himself dryly as he realized just what the trigger was. In his past life, his chakra had been so familiar with the sexy moments with his mother and sisters that it basically defined itself after that concept. And now, it seemed that it activated itself on such moments again. No matter how dumb, crazy and weird it may sound, it was the truth. The exposure to sexiness and intimacy was the trigger for his power. When Naruto realized this fact, he felt himself involuntarily uttering one word that basically defined his current life. Fuck. Chapter 3. The Truth Behind the Truth. Imnitasis deviant. Imnitasis deviant. Imnitasis deviant. Imnitasis deviant. This was the constant mantra that went through the mind of Naruto as he sat inside a tent of the rebellion camp. Ao was sitting near him with a serious expression. Also, near to him sat the rebellion faction leader, Mei, who was constantly glancing at him and blushing profusely each time. No doubt due to the thought of her first kiss she gave to the said man. It may have been subtle, but it was still noticeable. Mei had started to be more affectionate to him ever since their return from the ambush attack. Whether it be listening to his words more or spending more time with him through the pretense of planning for war with him. Naruto had a trickle of doubt in his mind that Mei had some sort of interest in him. Just what kind of interest she had, he was still oblivious to it. But all those thoughts were thrown out of the window in favor of his current dilemma. I'm not a sex deviant. Naruto had been equal parts appalled and horrified by the startling revelation that he had came up to. The truth that his powers could only activate at erotic situations was not only embarrassing, but also the fact that it happened subconsciously was a tragedy in itself. It just went on to show that he was, inherently, a pervert. And that realization depressed him. From now on, I think we have to make our moves carefully. Ao's voice broke Naruto out of his stupor. The single-eyed shinobi was looking at both Mei and Naruto with a serious expression. It was just your luck Mei-sama that Naruto-sama was also with you. Mei's cheeks got a deeper red hue on it as she once again remembered her time with Naruto. Yes. Mei uncharacteristically stumbled on her words. Well, I'm glad that Naruto-kun was. She suddenly got a slight shy look on her face as she avoided Naruto's face. With me. Ao nodded in agreement to his leader's words, after which he looked at Naruto with a curious expression. Naruto-sama, he addressed the blonde in a respectful yet curious tone. If you are this powerful, then why don't you end this war single-handedly? He asked him. After all, you have the power to wipe out a whole army with no difficulty. Naruto scratched the back of his neck with an embarrassed expression. It's not that simple, Ao-san. He replied back as he felt his face heat up at the thought of his condition. My powers are a bit complicated. Ao raised an eyebrow when he heard the blonde's words. Just how can your shinobi powers be complicated? He asked in a tone that insinuated that he did not believe the blonde Uzumaki's claim. Naruto felt his face heat up even more in embarrassment as he lowered his head in depression. Let's not talk about that. He stated while being too embarrassed to talk about his predicament. Ao remained confused at this, but chose to shrug it off as he decided to ignore Naruto's complex behavior. He then turned towards Mei, who had remained silent during his conversation with the blonde. Mei-sama. What is our next move? He asked her. Hearing his question, Mei turned her attention to him as she gained a serious expression. All we can do now is wait, Ao. She replied back. Hearing her reply, Ao gained a frown on his face. Being too much defensive could be harmful, Mei-sama. He then gave a slight glance at Naruto. At the moment, we have an advantage of moral boost over them after Naruto-sama had showcased his immense powers to some of Mizukage's shinobi. Mei heard all this while remaining silent. She then looked at Naruto to see an uncomfortable expression on his face and immediately realized that there really was something fishy in regards to his powers, as someone so powerful should not be this uncomfortable in regards to launching an attack. It's not an option for the current moment, Ao. Mei replied back in her stern, authoritative tone as she decided to silently relieve the person she was starting to admire. We would only be marching to our own destruction if we were show haste in this. But Naruto-sama is not infallible. Mei cut off Ao's words before he could even complete. As much powerful as he is still vulnerable to surprise attacks that even he would not be expecting. She then wore a stern expression as she looked at her subordinate. We can't take chances here, Ao. Ao remained silent for a few 10 seconds before his shoulders sagged in defeat as he wore a resigned expression while giving her a nod. I understand, Mei-sama. Mei nodded back with a satisfied smile. She then turned back to Naruto only to be greeted with a grateful and warm smile that he directed at her for saving him from his predicament. The blush slowly crept up her face as she quickly averted her eyes from Naruto. Her heart thrummed wildly as she suddenly recalled her intimate moment with him. And she started to curse herself for it. She was wildly known for being a seductress, being able to have men dance around her fingers. And now, for her to be affected this much due to one man, who also happened to be the one she gave her first kiss to, left her in a vulnerable state. Unknowingly, Naruto Uzumaki had somehow wormed his way into her heart. Madara stared into the vast expanse of darkness inside a secluded cave as he pondered on all the recent events since his reawakening to the realm of living. He had been resurrected back to the world of living, although not in the way he had planned. Instead of being resurrected by Rin Tensei using the Rinnegan he had left behind, he was reanimated by the Ito Tensei technique that was developed by that accursed Senju brother of his rival, Hashirama Senju. And if that wasn't enough, he quickly learned that he had been resurrected at the worst possible time. Because he had been in the presence of the 3 reawakened goddesses of chakra. And worst of all, Naruto Utsutsuki, reborn as Naruto Uzumaki, was once again back in this world. Madara mused on all this as he stared into the darkness with a stoic expression on his visage. Nothing had gone according to his plan. But at least someone was satisfied by the recent developments. To think he had reincarnated himself in this time. The voice that came from darkness let out an amused chuckle. My rival definitely has not changed in regards to his unpredictability. We are severely overwhelmed here. Another voice spoke up as Toby suddenly swirled into existence behind Madara. His face mask obscured any expression that he had on his visage. With the rabbit goddess, the priestess of 6 paths and the Hyuga ancestor standing against us, we are extremely short on power factor. Madara never turned around as he continued to stare into the darkness of the enormously large cave. If it had only been them, then I would not have been that much concerned. Madara said in gruff tone. His eyes then narrowed as he showed a grave expression. But what concerns me is the presence of Naruto Utsutsuki. Toby narrowed his lone Sharingan eye through his mask at Madara. He then raised his hand to his mask before he took off the said mask to reveal his face to the real world. The face, which had half of its portion in destroyed state. The face, which many of the Konoha shinobi thought to be dead. It was the face of Obito Uchiha. I don't understand, Madara. Obito remarked as he looked at the Uchiha Supremo with a frown on his visage. If the information from my spies are correct, then he is no longer as powerful as he used to be. His body is unable to handle the powers he used to wield in his previous life, resulting in it rejecting those powers. Obito then raised his eyebrows curiously at Madara. I don't understand why you fear him the most out of all the others. Fool, the voice once again came out of darkness as suddenly, the Jido statue came out of shadows to the visibility of both the Uchiha. It had 2 of its eyes opened up in a humanly manner. But that was only human thing about it as the glowing red eyes bore down upon both the Uchiha. He is the one who cannot be matched by a mere mortal. He is a being who cannot even be classified as a human. In fact, only I possess the power that could challenge the prowess of my rival. Obito grimaced slightly as he stared at the sight of the Jido standing in front of him. More astonishing was the fact that it had spoken all those words just now. Before Madara had explained to him some things, he had always thought of Jido being a mere husk of the original body of 10 tails. But now, it sent shivers down his spine to know that it contained an entity that was beyond his widest comprehension. The gigantic statue of Jido let out a rumbling chuckle as he sensed uneasiness from the young Uchiha. Though, he didn't say anything about it as he ignored all this. For the sake of my curiosity, could you tell me one thing? Obito suddenly asked while remaining wary of the menacing entity in front of him. Just who are you? Our chuckles reverberated across the whole cave, the Jido gazed down at both the standing Uchiha with its red menacing eyes. Let me think about it. I guess, in my most degraded, inhuman, animalistic and incomplete version, I'm what you people called as the Juubi. So you're the Juubi. Obito whispered to himself while Madara slightly shook his head at the younger Uchiha's lack of knowledge. He didn't know just how many times he had told Obito to look up on all the information that he could have found on the history of the world. Suddenly, an immense pressure slammed upon the 2 Uchiha standing there as the Jido glared down at them with his crimson eyes. Don't compare me to the identity that represents nothing but that of animalistic unintelligent personality. Heck, even the power of that incomplete self of mine pales in comparison to my original powers. Obito blinked to himself in surprise at that remark as Madara had a visible smirk etched on his lips. More powerful than Juubi, Obito trailed off in slight shock before he miraculously recovered. Just how powerful are you? Are you something akin to a real god? The giant entity let out a snort. I'm far from being the one to hold the title of god. In fact, I'm just the polar opposite of a god. Both Obito and Madara remained silent at that proclamation as they felt slight shivers going down their spine at the powerful entity's words. Even the elder Uchiha, who had been maintaining a calm facade up until now, couldn't help but feel unsettled at that ominous remark. The entity smirked to himself in his mind as he chose to ignore the humans below him. He then got lost in his own thoughts as his mind sidetracked towards the topic of his rival. I wonder how you are doing right now, rival. Few days passed since the event of ambush and ever since then it had been somewhat awkward for Naruto. Rumors of what Naruto accomplished had quickly spread out like a wildfire. Everywhere he went, he was met with awe-inspired looks on the faces of the rebellion faction shinobi. What's more, Naruto had received an entirely different kind of attention from the rebellion faction leader, Mei Terumi. Before the ambush, Mei had often associated Naruto with the term interesting. But, after the entire fiasco happened, her total outlook on him changed. But the amount of attention she tried to give to Naruto at every possible turns, it was clear to everyone that Mei had developed an entirely different kind of interest in him. But, back to the matter of the rebellion faction, all the shinobi on the rebellion side were extremely high on morale. And the cause of it was none other than news of the feats and achievements of Naruto when he used and showcased his godly powers to thrash the Mizukage's shinobi when they had tried to ambush him along with their leader. The entire populace of the rebellion faction were so high on spirit that they were even ready to go on an assault over the shinobi of the Mizukage's force. Muttering of being able to achieve success in this assault with the presence of Naruto was a common occurrence. In fact, so high were their morality that some even proclaimed of possibly succeeding, without even needing the interference of their new hope and inspiration, by the name of Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto, who stood inside a tent while hearing buzzing mutterings that occurred outside, as he sighed exasperatedly to himself. He knew that with his power show on that fated ambush, he had given the rebellion side an entirely different level of inspiration. And, he was all too glad that he had somehow produced a new wave of inspiration among the shinobi of this group. But, when it came to the verge of dragging him to the battlefield while trying to intimidate an army with only his lone presence, then that became a bit too much. Although, there was no doubt about the fact that his original powers placed him in a pedestal that cannot even be matched by Himuri and Himari. Heck, their powers couldn't be matched to the level that he made the world believe he was at in the past. In reality, he had always suppressed his powers to the manageable levels he could, even after which he happened to above the level of Himuri and Himari. His true and original power, on the other hand, was something before which even Kaguya's powers paled. It was so otherworldly that it had seldom been a topic of discussion among the four of them in the past. But, unfortunately for him, all that power was now handicapped with his latest condition. It was a bit pitiful for him. For someone who once upon a time was worshipped as a god by many of the humanity, was reduced to such an embarrassing state. It just went on to show how life can mess you up from unspoken directions. They are getting a bit restless, aren't they? Naruto was broken out of his thoughts when he heard a voice coming from his back. As he turned around, he was greeted to the sight of Mei standing there with a soft and warm smile on her face. Naruto smiled back slightly at the red-haired leader. They sure have high spirits at the moment. He replied back with his smile. Mei just shook her head at his words as she walked up to his side and stood beside him. I know it must be putting a lot of pressure on you. Especially considering your condition. She said, while emphasizing on the word condition. She knew what the blonde was going through. Well, it's true that it took some time, patience and a huge amount of coaxing, but she had finally been let in on the secret that he held to himself. Although, she had to say to him that if she could trust him on being loyal and truthful towards the rebel faction, even though he was an outsider, then he could at least show the same courtesy to her. Mei had actually felt a bit disgusted with herself for manipulating the person she admired in such a manner, but she was unable to take it anymore. She was starting to be a bit desperate to know about Naruto, and it showed in her actions. Naruto smiled a little as he looked at Mei. I guess I'm getting a bit used to it by now. He said, as he still heard all the chattering that was happening outside his tent. Mei smiled in a comforting manner at Naruto, as she knew how much pressurized he was behind that calm smile he wore right now. Suddenly seeing the opportunity to get a bit closer to the man she was falling for, she opened her mouth in order to engage in a conversation with him. But, she was interrupted just in the nick of the time by none other than Ao. Mei-sama. Naruto-sama. Ao greeted them as he walked inside the tent. Hey Ao. Naruto greeted him with a bit of cheerfulness as he waved at him. Ao nodded to the blonde with a slight smile before he turned towards his leader. When he did that, he suddenly took a step back as he saw visible wisps of red miasma emitting from Mei while having her eyes overshadowed by her hair. Ao, I will kill you. Mei whispered out in a deadly tone with her eyes still being overshadowed. Ao blanched at his place as he once again took a step back in fright. What did I do, he asked in comically frightened and confused expression. Naruto chuckled at the scene that was playing out in front of his eyes as Mei and Ao continued their regular argument. It was like a comical relief for him from all the stress that had piled on him in the last few days. And he needed it if he had to remain sane amidst all the craziness that surrounded his life. So, what's the matter, Ao? Naruto interrupted the moment as he asked his question. Ao almost turned his grateful eyes towards the blonde for rescuing him from Mei's wrath, but he hid it well with a mask of calm look. I am here to ask about our next move. I still think that. Not that again. Mei interrupted his words with a slight groan as she looked a bit annoyed at the one-eyed shinobi. We already talked about this, Ao. Why are you still so fixated on it? Because I can't seem to find a better time to launch an assault on our enemy. Ao replied back with his typical stiff tone as he calmly looked at his leader. Our army is in high spirits at the moment. We have the firepower to back up our attack. As he said this, he gave a visible glance towards Naruto. Something which made the said blonde uncomfortable. An opportunity like this comes only rarely. Our entire faction is high in morale at the moment. Mei started to growl lowly as she looked at Ao in an irritated manner. You are starting to grate on my nerves, Ao. She voiced out her words in a dangerous manner. Naruto between both Ao and Mei with an awkward smile as he remained unsure on how to proceed in this situation. A major part of his unparalleled confidence and dominance came from the godly powers that he held in his previous life. But, now that it was restricted to him, he felt as if he became something akin to a handicapped man. Maybe he is right. Naruto conceded to Ao's words reluctantly. When Mei turned towards him with a stunned expression, he grimaced slightly. At the moment, all the shinobi in our faction is high in terms of morality. And, when a human runs extremely high on inspiration and hope, then they are said to temporarily reach their potential, even if they are far from achieving it. As Naruto said all this, Ao was seen nodding in agreement to the blonde's words. He looked a bit relieved and glad that the most powerful shinobi from their faction was finally starting to see his view. If all this went right, then victory was just a few steps away from them. Mei's expression had softened from her stunned look as she looked at Naruto with a tender look. Naruto, even with the words he had uttered right now, she knew just how much turmoil he was in on the inside right now. It just went on to show how much caring Naruto was, thinking about others' welfare even before his own. And it enamored her more to him. Really, Mei-sama? Ao suddenly said in an exasperated tone as he shook his head in a reprimanding manner. I know you are doing all this for the safety of Naruto-sama, but you should put your feelings aside for the war. What Mei spluttered out as a fierce blush quickly sprung up on her face at the words, or rather the meaning behind the words insinuated by Ao. She then glanced worriedly at Naruto to see if he found out about her feelings for him. She wanted him to know about it, but not on such a setting. Ao, it seemed, didn't look like he was finished as he continued. I know you care for Naruto-sama. In fact, I'm glad that our leader has chosen such a fine man. By this point, Mei possessed a disbelieving look on her face as her face looked like a ripe tomato. Ao. Be quiet. She hissed at him threateningly. Though, her threat lost half of its intimidation factor due to the splutter it carried with it, along with the enormous blush on her face. Naruto looked at transpiring scene in front of him with curious eyes. Feelings. Chosen fine man. What the heck were they talking about? Although he was out of the loop at what was going on around him, he had to admit that the scene in front of him was a bit amusing to see. I know the emotions you have for him have blossomed almost fully by now. Sadly, Ao seemed to ignore the impending doom that he was voluntarily calling upon himself as he continued his tirade. But you to focus more on the war at the moment than the feelings that you have. Snap. Ao's rant suddenly came to a halt as his attention quickly diverted towards the origin of the sound. As it did, he paled at the sight that was presented to him. Because standing before him, like a wrathful goddess, was Mei Terumi, as menacing red aura surrounded her in an intimidating manner, while her eyes remained overshadowed by her hair. Now Mei's deadly whisper echoed throughout the whole tent, all the while her eyes remained shadowed. Shut up or I'll kill you. Ao paled to himself with real fright as he looked as if he would soil himself anytime due to the terror in front of him. He didn't know why, but he felt that Mei would really go. All the while, Naruto watched entire scene with a bemused expression on his face. His face showed just how much entertaining he thought all this was. They really relieved me from my stress. It was dark, with only small wisps of strange light illuminating the otherwise dark corridor he was in. The enormously large corridor seemed to blend with colors of red, black and orange. The sight wasn't exactly what you would call as pleasant. In fact, from it would induce a feeling of unsettlement in it, with knee-length water that filled the floor Naruto stood on. All in all, the scenery in front of him was none other than that of a sewer. You got me kidding me? Naruto yelled out as his face showed an expression of severe despair as he looked at the sewer in front of him. I know that I'm subconsciously a bit perverted. That my mind tends to be in gutter sometimes, but to give me a literal proof of that fact. The slap on his face with a solid evidence that not only did his mind tended to be in gutter, but that it in itself was a gutter. That, altogether, was a heavily depressing thought for him. I'm hopeless. He thought to himself with a hollowed expression as he showed an exhausted face. No doubt due to his current life twisting up in the most ridiculous fashion possible. After a few minutes wallowing pitifully to himself, Naruto decided that it was high time for him to get done with the job he had came here for. With that, he started to walk through the dimly illuminated corridor, with his feet making splash noises every time it made contact the water. It was a few minutes of walking before he finally reached a place that didn't look like an endless expanse of corridor. In front of him stood a massive gate of iron bars, with a clearly visible seal in its center holding the lock. As he stood in front of the colossal gate, he could finally feel the warmth that had been encasing his entire self since the moment he came into the mindscape. A warmth that he was all too familiar with. So I'm actually my powerful self in my mindscape. Naruto thought to himself as he inspected his hands, which casually showcased the chakra swirling around it like it was a child's play, when in truth no meager shinobi could even dream of materializing pure chakra in such a wonderful manner. I retained my entire powers here. Naruto felt his self-confidence returning to him with a vengeance. His whole body oozed an aura of dominance and strength as he felt reassured at his powers still being inside of him. After all, a major chunk of his pride and confidence originated from the unparalleled amount of power that he wielded in his previous life. A strong gust of wind suddenly washed over Naruto, which successfully grabbed the said blonde's attention. As he looked forward towards the gate, he was presented the sight of two giant menacing red eyes, along with sharp intimidating teeth that would have scared the hell out of any normal human. But Naruto was anything but a normal human. "Come here," a deep distorted voice echoed throughout the whole sewer. "So that I could welcome my jailer." Naruto shook his head in a disappointed manner. "Is this what you are reduced to now?" He thought to himself as he stared at the entity behind the gates with slight sad eyes. A giant mass of hatred. Still, Naruto decided to comply with his tenant's wish as he walked towards the giant bar gate and walked through the gap between the bars to reach inside the gate. Kyuubi seemed to be ecstatic that it finally got its ticket to freedom within its arm length as it grinned in a malicious manner. Naruto stood silently in front of the Kyuubi with a calm face as he stared the biju that was sealed inside of him. He then observed as a giddy Kyuubi raised its massive hand above him and brought it down on him with the intent to squash him to a bloody paste. He sighed resignedly as when the hand was just inches above him, it got stopped by a single hand, courtesy of Naruto. What? Kyuubi looked baffled at the phenomenon of his enormous hand being stopped by a puny human hand. "How did you?" Now, Naruto said with a mischievous smile as he looked at Kyuubi. It was a smile that suddenly brought a wave of nostalgia over the biju. "Is that the way you treat your two-sama after not seeing him for a long time, Kurumi-chan?" At Naruto's teasing tone, Kyuubi's breath hitched as it finally got to notice the nature of chakra the blonde possessed. The aura that was reminiscent to a person that was long considered to be dead. Upon inspecting closer, the biju even discovered a face that it thought it would never see again. He was the one who had essentially created her, along with her siblings. While Himuri had been the one to host the Juubi inside her, it was Naruto who had split the powers of 10 tails into 9 parts, effectively giving rise to the birth of 9 biju. In essence, he was their creator. D2-sama Kyuubi said in a trembled voice, while unable to believe that this was really happening. Is that really you?" Naruto said nothing else but stare at the biju with a sincere smile on his face. But that was all the moment of respite he had. "2-sama." Naruto's eyes almost bugged out of its socket as he saw the massive Kyuubi jumping into the air towards his direction. Wait. Kurumi-chan, his words were cut off as everything in his vision suddenly went white as if a bright light had suddenly blinded him. He then felt a body slam into his own, resulting in him collapsing to the ground with the one that collided with him on top of him. I hate it when she does that. Suffice to say, Naruto had prior experience to such things before in his previous life when it came to the sometimes exuberant biju. As Naruto lay on his back to the ground, he was able to feel a feminine body resting over his own. More specifically, this feminine body seemed to embrace his chest so tightly that he feared for his insides being spelt out due to the pressure. Though, Naruto still smiled to himself as he returned the embrace of the female clinging to him. The human female body of Kyuubi no Kitsune, Kurumi. Yes, Kyuubi was a woman. Even more astonishing was the fact that she had a human female body. With blood crimson dyed hair that reached up to her waist and an unparalleled hergless body figure, Kurumi was the kind of woman who could even make the heads of homosexual men turn around. Her attire consisted of short skimpy black dress that barely held her huge bosoms, with thigh-length boot and gloves that spanned over her whole arm. Combine that with the breathtaking beauty that her face possessed and you would get an enchanting goddess in front of you. Or, the devil seductress herself. Naruto's eyes twitched as he observed all this. Kurumi. Kurumi's ears twitched a bit as she looked up from Naruto's chest towards him. All the while, she adorned a blissful expression on her face. No doubt due to being reunited with most precious person. "What is it, Tusama?" she asked in a voice that was no longer demonic or distorted. It was seductive. Naruto's eyebrows twitched even more. "Just what the hell are you wearing?" She blinked to herself a few before she realized what her current attire was. Her face quickly lit up with an enormous crimson hue, but she still remained in her embrace with him. Hearing her sputter, Naruto sighed in an exasperated manner. "Let me guess. You took up this attire to look enchanting and seductive to the human race, didn't you?" Naruto said as he looked at the redhead with a dry look. In response, Kurumi just adorned an extremely flustered expression. But Tusama, I never acted like a whore. I'm still a virgin." Naruto's eyebrow twitching reached a new level as he heard the ridiculous comment. "Baka." He yelled at her with his own embarrassed expression. "I didn't need to know that." In the end, Naruto let out a huge sigh in defeat as Kurumi continued to wear her flustered expression. For a few moments, they did nothing but lay on the ground with Kurumi on top of Naruto while hugging his chest tightly to herself. It was clearly evident that she was ecstatic at a reunion with him. "Hey Kurumi," Naruto said as he continued to lie on the ground. "How come you didn't know before that it was me? You should have been aware of the occurrences in the outer world." At his question, Kurumi wore a sheepish look on her face. I was sleeping all this time. She replied back in an embarrassed tone. And I was unable to sort through your memories. I just couldn't overpower my presence over your mind to go through your memories. Naruto nodded when he heard this. That's understandable. Considering my power, it's no wonder that you were unable to do anything. Saying that, Naruto got up from the ground while getting out of the embrace of the Biju, who seemed a bit reluctant in letting off her hold on him. Releasing a sigh at all the ordeal he had to go through today, Naruto looked at Kurumi with a smile. Let's meet the other occupants in here, shall we? Kurumi blinked in surprise when she heard this. There is someone else here. Yeah, Naruto nodded in confirmation as he started to walk towards the bar gate and the seal that held Kurumi inside him. Kurumi silently followed his footsteps. The moment I entered my mindscape, I was able to detect foreign chakra signatures residing in me. With each step that he took towards the giant bar gate, his powers grew exponentially. It escalated to such a level that it started to saturate the very air inside his mindscape, easily suppressing even that of Kyuubi's. A testament to the baffling amount of power Naruto possessed. Sugoi, Kurumi whispered as she looked awed at the amount of power her creator was exuding. It had already surpassed her own by a mile. After walking up to the gate, Naruto inspected it with his observant eyes as he also looked up at the seal that held the gate. My, Naruto said with a barely concealed smirk on his face. Shinigami really did a number on this seal, didn't he? His smirk widened a little. And my father's ingenuity is separately visible in this. Truly impressive, but it's still not enough for me. His powers, which until now had been steadily yet bulkily growing, suddenly spiked to off the charts level. It was so overbearing and overwhelming that even Kurumi was brought down to her knees. What power? Kurumi thought to herself while looking astonished at the power output. Tusama is really amazing. Suddenly, the whole surrounding was blinded with a bright light, making Kurumi close her eyes immediately. The light illuminated the entire Sower that was in his mindscape, engulfing everything into the white light. When the whole light spectacle ended, Kurumi slowly opened her eyes back to the now unending wide expanse, only to get shocked at the sight in front of her. Standing in front of both Naruto and Kurumi were two people, a man and a woman. The man looked strikingly identical to Naruto. He had blonde locks similar to Naruto and cerulean blue eyes on his handsome face. His attire consisted of a haori over his jounin flak jacket with the kanji of Yonde etched on it. The woman on the other hand was a beautiful redhead who wore an outfit consisting of a high-collared, sleeveless blouse under a long, loose-fitting dress. All in all, she projected an image of serene and calm beauty. Something which no one who knew her would agree on, as serene and calm would be the last words they would associate her with. Naruto smiled in a slight excited manner as the two people standing before him were none other than his parents, Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki. Kushina blinked to herself as she realized that she had gained consciousness. She turned to her side to inspect her surrounding, only to be met face to face with her husband. Minato. What's happening? Minato looked equally confused, but that confusion soon turned in horror as he sensed something peculiar. Kushina, I can't feel the seal I placed on Naruto. What? Kushina yelled out in utter shock, which quickly turned into restless concern. What does that mean, Minato? What happened to Naruto? No need to be concerned about that. At the sudden intrusion of a third voice, both Minato and Kushina turned towards the origin of the voice. It was at this that they saw Naruto, along with Kurumi standing beside him. Both the adults remained confused for few seconds at his appearance before Kushina had an expression of realization dawning on her face. Naruto? Kushina asked in hopeful tone. Is that you? Naruto merely waved back at her with a smile. Hey there, Ka-chan. Naruto. In split second, a body swiftly slammed into Naruto, resulting in the said blonde releasing an from the force of impact. Even then, he had a bright grin on his face as he embraced his mother. He then turned towards his father, who had a happy smile on his face. Hey there, Tu-chan. In response, Minato jovially grinned at him. After few moments, everyone settled down at their places while calmly sitting at their places. It was after this that Kushina and Minato finally noticed the red-haired beauty clinging to Naruto's arm, all the while scowling at them. No doubt due to them interrupting her reunion with her most precious person. Naruto, who is she? Minato asked while pointing towards the Biju. At his father's inquiry, Naruto felt an awkward smile tug his lips. She is Naruto let out a sigh as he resigned himself to his fate. The Kyuubi. The area remained silent for few moments as both the parents stared at their son with unblinking eyes. Then, slowly, their eyes widened as they finally registered his words. Kyuubi. Both of them shouted in unison as they sprang up from the ground they were sitting on. They quickly casted wary looks at the female Biju, as well as shooting concerned looks towards their son for being in close proximity with him. It seemed the feeling was somewhat mutual, seeing as Kurumi was also scowling irritatingly at them. Now, Naruto tried to diffuse the tension that was unknowingly building up. No need to get hostile with each other. And Kurumi, he turned towards the beautiful Biju with a slight reprimanding look. You are not helping the case. They already have mistrust for you. No need to fan the flame with your non-cooperating look. They are my parents in this life, after all. Kurumi turned her head away from her creator's present parents with a haughty look. That's the sole reason why I didn't launch Bijudama at their mere appearance, to-sama. Hearing this, Naruto just sighed in defeat as he hung his head. Guess it's useless to advise her. Shaking his head in exasperation, Naruto walked up to his parents and stood before them. Then, lifting both his hands towards their heads, Naruto poked both his parents' foreheads with his 2 index fingers. All the while, both Minato and Kushina stared confusingly at their son. Suddenly, memories of Naruto's previous life flashed through their mind as they stood at their place with glass-eyed expressions. They looked dazed at the sudden influx of foreign memories that entered their mind. Then Minato suddenly stammered back from Naruto as he looked at his son with a baffled expression. Those memories you are. Naruto smiled faintly at his father while lowering down both his hands. Once upon a time, I used to go by the name of Naruto Utsutsuki. I'm the father and the originator of the Uchiha, Senju, Hyuga and many other clans that are known in the shinobi world. It can't be. Naruto, along with Minato and Kurumi, turned towards Kushina, who wore an expression of disbelief. As if she was in denial over something. Naruto smiled comfortingly at her. I know it's a bit too much to believe, but it can't be. Everyone, including Naruto, stammered back in surprise at her outburst as they stared at her while blinking in confusion. All the while, Kushina kept on mumbling to herself, which was audible to all the people there. You had an incestuous relationship. Naruto immediately blushed when he finally realized what his mother was implying. Her emerg. Be with your sisters. Kushina then held her head in her hands in comical distress. Even with your own mother. The fierce blush on Minato's face told Naruto what his father thought on such a topic. By this point, Kushina was sitting on the ground while moping to herself as if everything she knew about the world turned out to be false. Minato, who was on his wife's side, had an awkward smile to himself while Kurumi sneered at everyone save Naruto as if they were pitiful in her eyes. Naruto, who heard all the accusations from his current mother, had an embarrassed smile on his face. Yet, he still decided to make one last attempt at providing a reason for his actions. Love transcends all boundaries. He provided his reason lamely. Unfortunately, all it did was increasing Kushina's distress. Naruto chuckled embarrassingly while rubbing the back of his neck as he stared at his mother. I'm sorry, Ka-chan. You had to go through all that from my memories. He then made an expression of pity as he looked at her. I never thought that my memories could distress you so much, especially my memories with Ka-hime. Minato chuckled in a slight awkward manner in response, while Kushina, who was standing beside him, released a resigned sigh. Kurumi scoffed at both the humans, whose only saving grace, in her opinion, was that they were responsible for the rebirth of her beloved creator. Kushina shook her head to cast away all the distracting thoughts as she smiled at her son. It's okay, Naruto. While I'm a bit uncomfortable at your incestuous relationship with your sisters and your mother, she clearly shivered at that. I guess it's okay, as long as you are happy. I just wish for you to have a happy life, no matter where that happiness comes from. She finished with a motherly smile at her son. So what if the man standing before her used to be a legend so extraordinary that he was considered a god? He was still her son. She had carried him in her womb for 9 months. She had sung lullaby to him while he was her womb, all the while dreaming of their blossoming family in the future. She had gone through the pain of the labor just to see the face of wonderful creation both she and Minato had created. So what if Naruto had been something akin to a god in the past? Her love as a mother for him transcended any legend that Naruto had. Rebirth or not, he was son. Nothing could ever change that fact. Ah-chan, Naruto said in a rare emotional tone as he felt his eyes getting slightly misty. He then smiled gratefully at her. Thank you. Minato put an arm around his wife's shoulder as he smiled at his son. I agree with her, Naruto. All we care about is your happiness. Because even if you are something far greater than we could ever comprehend, you are still our son. Du-chan, Naruto now looked at his father with faint smile. Though, Minato got a thoughtful look on his face as he smiled wryly to himself. I think Jiraiya-sensei must be quite proud of you now. He finished with while holding a grin on his face. Of course he would, Kushina muttered in a dark tone as she held a dangerous look on her face. Both father and son duo just laughed nervously in response to this. Everyone's attention quickly diverted away when they witnessed the bodies of Naruto's parents suddenly starting to fade away. Their forms started to become transparent, signifying that they were starting to disappear away from the mindscape. It's time. Minato said as he observed both his and Kushina's body becoming lighter. Naruto, Kushina called out to him with a melancholic smile. Before we go away, would you like to hear about our last words to you before we died? When she received a silent yet eager look from her son, she smiled at him. Then listened carefully. These were the word. Naruto, don't be picky. Eat lots and grow strong. Make sure that you bathe every day and stay warm. Also, don't stay up late. You need lots of sleep and make friends. You don't need a lot of friends, just a few ones you can really trust. I wasn't very good at it, but keep up with your studies and practice your ninjutsu hard. Remember that everyone has strengths and weaknesses, so don't get too depressed if you can't do something well. Respect your teachers and upperclassmen at the academy. Oh, and this is important. It's about the 3 prohibitions for a shinobi. Be extra careful about lending and borrowing money. Put your mission wages into your savings account. No alcohol until you're 20. Too much can ruin your health, so drink in moderation. Another prohibition is women. I'm a woman, so I don't know too much about this, but all you need to remember is that this world is made up of men and women, so it's only natural to take an interest in girls, but just don't get hooked on bad women. Find someone just like me. Speaking of the 3 prohibitions, be wary of Jiraiya-sensei, you know. Minato chuckled a bit as he looked at his fading wife. It's a bit late for many of those things. Don't you agree? Yeah, Kushina laughed with her tears that had built up now clearly escaping from her eyes. She then looked at Naruto with her tearful smile as she continued. Naruto, from now on, you're going to face lots of pain and hardship. Be true to yourself, have a dream, and have the confidence to make that dream come true. There's so much more that I want to pass on to you. I wish I could stay with you longer. I love you. Ah-chan. Naruto looked dazed at the amount of emotion she was pouring into her words. Minato held his wife's fading body to his own vanishing form. He then looked at his son with a myriad of emotions as his form now started to fade into nothing. Naruto, I know I'm the cause of your less than desirable childhood. After what I did, I doubt I have the right to call myself your father. He had a slight tearful eye as he smiled at his son. But no matter what happens, I'm proud to be your father, Naruto. Oh Naruto, Kushina was now openly crying as her body was on the verge of disappearance. Thank you for letting me be your mother and for letting Minato be your father. Thank you for being our son. Thank you. It was with those last emotional words that they both completely faded away from his mind, leaving nothing behind. Naruto stood unmoving at his place while his face remained shadowed by his hair as he refused to show his emotions to the outer world. Even if the only other person present there was Kurumi. Kusama, Kurumi said in a tentative manner as she looked at the blonde. Even she knew how delicate Naruto must be after going through that emotional ordeal. So this is how a true parent's love feels. Naruto said as he suddenly gained a smile on his face. I kind of feel light right now. Kurumi looked confusingly at him as he gave her his smile. I guess it's time for me to go back. Naruto suddenly said as if he had sensed something. I think Mei would need my attention at the moment. That bimbo can't be more important than me, Kusama. Kurumi pouted angrily at him. Naruto just chuckled in response to this as he started to fade away from the mindscape. Kurumi blinked owlishly before she made a startled face. Hey. You are really leaving me for that red-haired bimbo? You can't do that, Kusama. Kurumi pouted even more angrily at him. Unfortunately, Naruto had already disappeared from his place. Grrrr. Kusama. Naruto slowly came back to the real world with blinking eyes. Upon adjusting fully to the vision of his surrounding, he finally noticed Mei. His face was hovering right above his. Mei, what are you doing? Ah. Mei jerked back from position as her face lit up like a Christmas tree while quickly facing away from him. It was as if she was caught red-handed in doing something wrong or something she was not supposed to do. Which was right, considering the fact that she, unknown to Naruto, was going to steal a kiss from him in his sleep. Naruto just stared confusingly at her strange behavior. Naruto-kun, Mei called out to him while mustering up all the composure she could. Get ready. We are going to the battlefield. News is that Yugura himself would be coming to the battlefield in consideration to your presence. I see. Naruto sat up from him bed with a calm, serious look. So it's time, huh? Mei nodded back in confirmation. When he saw this, Naruto had a calm smirk on his face despite all the handicap he had. Because, it was time for the final battle. What if Naruto is Kaguya's husband harem? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.